Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
Though a bird can't fly, that doesn't mean it never will. By Phalanx. What might have been if Kuina had survived her fall down the dojo stairs? She and Zoro strive to become the greatest swordsman in the world, allegiances and promises notwithstanding. Adios.
Yes, Tashigi, you heard me right. I said, crocodile. But how can that be? He's supposed to be on the world government side. The only side that Sand Bastard is on is his own. He's been playing everyone for fools. Smoker was gazing down at the still figure of Piers on the infirmary bed as he said this, his expression dark as he took in the after effects of his brief absence. The petty officer was almost unrecognizable beneath the tangle of bandages, tubes and assorted medical paraphernalia that had been necessary to keep him clinging onto the side of the living. "Keep your voices down, or take it elsewhere," Dr. Francis snapped. "This is an infirmary, not a war room." The doctor had been in a foul mood since Smoker's return. In fact, the first thing the old man had done was to walk up to the captain and attempt to kick him in the shins. This had been accompanied with an angry tirade about how he had told him so, and not to forget that not all of Smoker's men were, like either of you one-man army devil fruit freaks. As the captain was a smoke logia, the actual kick itself of course had no effect, but it was the thought that counted. Tashigi, who knew the captain best of everyone on board, could tell that despite his stoic demeanor Captain Smoker was upset. Not angry, furious or enraged. Mind you, all those were very common states of mind for Smoker to be in. But upset, something that had happened to the captain during the period he had spent as Crocodile's prisoner, and his escape had shaken him, badly. Coming back to the ship to hear her report, which had included Briggs' brief communication and the sinister interruption that had ended it, and then finding his men and one of his protégés in such a deplorable state had simply been the last straw. And when that happened, his reaction was incredibly predictable. At least from Tashigi's point of view, it was. He was going to do something reckless, so she wasn't surprised when upon Dr. Francis's sharp remark, Captain Smoker had turned and wordlessly walked out of the infirmary. He had the air of a man who had had enough and had made up his mind. By the time she'd gone after him he was already astride his smoke bike, his expression grim. "Captain Smoker, where are you going?" Her heart was sinking as she said it, because inwardly, she already knew what would be the answer. "I'm heading out to sea. Urgent business. I'm leaving everything up to you, Tashigi." She had been right, he was going to do something reckless. But Captain Smoker, what about those pirates, and Baroque works, the rebellion, and what Briggs said? And Briggs sounded like he was in trouble. "I'm very sure something bad happened to him." "Tashigi, do whatever you see fit. Go after the Straw Hats, or head to Alubarna and stop the rebellion, or Nanohana to find out what happened to Briggs. Whichever you choose, I'll take responsibility for it. But, as for Briggs, I wouldn't worry too much. There's something you need to know about him, Tashigi. Briggs is something like..." The captain paused for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. "A cockroach. Trust me when I say if it were that easy to get rid of him, it would have happened a long time ago." With this unflattering analogy, he left. Tashigi watched him leave, uncomfortably aware that once again, she was being left alone to handle the situation. Across the desert, the motley crew that formed the Straw Hat Pirates were all seated on the back of the giant sand crab. Anyone observing might have noted that the tense atmosphere of the gathered pirates. They might have also attributed the silence to the absence of one of their own. So who was she? The kimono girl. A voice finally spoke out, over the sound of scuttling sand crab. Zoro scowled at Nami. It wasn't any of her damn business and he told her as much. "Is that any way to speak to Oh, you mean Kuina-kun? Nami Swan, don't tell me, are you JEA?" Everyone cringed as Nami smacked Sanji over the head. This was followed by another furious snarl. "Kuina-kun? What the hell? I told you she was off limits, you damn pervert. What happens between me and Kuina-kun is none of your. Why you arrow ba?" Everyone cringed again as Nami smacked both of them to prevent the two men from fighting. "Will the kimono lady be all right?" Chopper wondered as Zoro and Sanji recovered from the pounding. "We didn't see her after the room collapsed and flooded with water." Yeah, she's strong, she'll be fine. What the hell are you worrying about her? Zoro wondered if his crew had always been such busybodies and he just hadn't noticed it. Everyone knew the answer to that, really. It was because the one everyone was really worried about was Luffy, and the kimono girl presented a welcome distraction from thinking about their captain's chances of defeating a warlord of the sea. He'd never failed them before. He wouldn't lose to that hook-handed monster now. He just wouldn't. When Pell came to, he realized he was lying on something soft. Someone was bending over him. The training of a lifetime and the instincts it had granted took over. Please let go of my hand. It was only then when Pell realized that he had the figure's hand in a vice-like grip. From the touch he immediately knew it belonged to a girl. In fact, it belonged to the girl with the sword. Without being conscious of it, he had bolted upright and defensively caught her extended hand, perhaps a little too roughly. My apologies. Reflexes. He released her hand, and reflected that he had been doing a lot of that to her recently. It's all right, she said, withdrawing and gingerly rubbing at her wrist as she did so. He hoped he hadn't hurt her. You're really fast. I guess that means Pell-sama is much better now. You know my name? That's what they seem to be calling you here. Where are we? What happened? Pell-sama collapsed. Fortunately we were near an inn. The innkeeper was very kind. Apparently he used to be an army medic. He is the one who tended to Pell-sama's injuries. He keeps talking about being a king's man and about not being part of the rebellion. And all those reports about the king burning down Nanohana are nothing but lies. Burning down Nanohana? No, that cannot be. His voice was raised despite himself. The girl shrugged. That's what they say. Pell groaned. King Cobra would never do something like that, but it didn't matter, because if rumors like that had spread, there was no question as to what the rebel army's reaction would be. The truth was but a trivial detail compared to what rebels wanted to believe. Tell me, the rebellion, it has started then? Not in this town, but they said that there would be trouble in Alubarna once the rebel army gets there. This was wrong. All wrong. Inwardly Pell apologized to Chaka and the king for leaving them alone to handle what must be a nightmare situation, but what was done was done. He had to stay focused on the matters at hand. What of the boy? The girl's face remained impassive. Several hours ago. Just look at these terrible injuries. What manner of monster was Pell-sama fighting? The innkeeper shook his head as he exchanged a blood-soaked cloth for a fresh one as he tended to the royal guardian's injuries. It had been quite a struggle for the short little man to get the unconscious soldier laid out on the table. One with powers of a devil, was all Kuina could bring herself to say as she gathered their blood-stained clothing. The innkeeper had instructed her to have them soaked in a tub he had prepared. He'd also loaned her a robe so she could have her kimono cleaned. Kuina didn't know it then, but what with water being a scarce resource, the man's generosity on even such trivial issues should have been something worthy of note. Of course, she also didn't know that the innkeeper had come to assume that she must be some important dignitary with some relation to the royals. At least, he had decided that she must be, since Pell the Falcon himself had been assigned as part of Heaven never seen such terrible injuries, not even during the time I served in the War of. Well, that was probably before you were born. Still, what kind of devil breaks bones and impales a poor young boy through? Wondered the man. A poor young boy. It was all Kuina could do not to bite her lip at this. Kuina tuned the man's voice out as she turned her attention to the poor young boy, who was laid out on the other table. She was finding it hard to believe that this really was the infamous Straw Hat Luffy. He didn't seem like anything she had expected. In fact, he just seemed so young and foolish and unthreatening and vulnerable. In a somewhat frightening way he reminded her of Zoro during his idiot child years. The doctor had taken a brief moment earlier to examine the boy's injuries. She wasn't sure if she would ever get used to thinking of Straw Hat as a boy, before immediately proceeding to tend to the man who smelled of feathers. Apparently, Pell-sama, as the innkeeper called him, was a well-known hero in this country. She supposed that it was natural that the man's first impulse would be to save the famous personage that he knew first. Or perhaps he had come to the conclusion there was no saving this boy and it would be kinder to just let him die peacefully. But the boy wasn't dead yet. She could hear him breathing. She could hear each and every desperate rattle as he fought for breath. She hated the sound. It reminded her too much of Piers, painfully fighting for each life-giving breath in the sick bay, as he lay on that operating table that was slick with his own blood. "Are you all right, Lady Kuina? You look about to faint," the innkeeper's voice interrupted her thoughts. "It's all right. I just felt a little sick. In that case I am truly sorry to impose, but I may need your assistance here." She obeyed and came up to the innkeeper. "I need you to hold Pell-sama in place. No, under the arms. Yes. Lock your arms. Good, just like that. Keep an eye on his breathing and heartbeat and let me know if shows signs of coming to. This is a lot easier to do if the patient is relaxed or unconscious." She complied, placing her sensitive fingers on her new charge's pulse. She couldn't help noticing that his heartbeat felt rather like the rapid fluttering of a bird's wings. "Good. Now hold on tightly and pull backwards as much as you can." She obeyed. For a man of his size, Pell-sama was surprisingly light. She could hear the doctor grunt as he pulled on the other end. For what seemed for ages she found herself in a somewhat comical parody of tug-of-war with an unconscious soldier in the middle. But eventually there was a sudden movement and an audible pop of bone. "What was that?" cried Kuina in alarm. "That was the sound of a partially dislocated hip being pulled back into place," said the innkeeper with some satisfaction as he examined his patient. "Don't worry, no new bones broken. I can't even imagine how Pell-sama managed to walk around with that injury. It must have been excruciating." Excruciating? Was it as excruciating as what Straw Hat must be feeling right now, being impaled through like that? True, he may have been a scoundrel, but even so, did anyone deserve to die in such a way? And why was she standing there, feeling sorry for a criminal who had managed to destroy so much of what she had held dear? More on a whim than any real concern, she turned towards where Straw Hat was lying. "The boy's injuries are quite severe. I'm afraid there's not much." The innkeeper did not budge from Pell-sama's side, but his tone spoke volumes. All it would take was for this criminal mastermind to expire and Zoro would be free and be the same person she had always known. She gritted her teeth. It was a perfect opportunity. The man who smelled of feathers was out cold, and the innkeeper had appeared to have all but given up on this patient. All she had to do was push Straw Hat further along a journey that he had already begun, and all her problems would be over. No one would ever need to know. But before she could progress further along this path of thought, a voice spoke in her head. "It is dishonorable for a swordsman to continue fighting against an opponent who has already been beaten." This time, her own words, oft repeated, sounded as though they had been spoken in Pell-sama's steely soft voice, that had both awed and frightened her. She exhaled slowly. No, she wouldn't stoop as low to kill someone in cold blood when he couldn't defend himself, never. But the insidious other voice kept whispering, "Then just do nothing." Doing nothing wasn't the same as doing something, was it? She didn't have to do anything to get what she wanted anyway. "Girl, please, save this boy." Once again that man's voice resonated in her head. She didn't owe that Pell-sama anything. She didn't have to listen to his orders, as compelling as he could be. It was better this way. She wasn't sure if she'd be able to kill Straw Hat Luffy now that she had discovered what he was like, but that didn't mean she had to save him. Straw Hat was going to die on his own. No one could blame her. Unbidden, the memory of a different voice, this one mocking, filled her mind. "How is that different from what you just did to my employees? What a joke." Suddenly, Kuina saw the shallowness of her own reasoning and the dark turn she had been contemplating, and with a sickening twinge of shame she realized she had almost become nothing better than the S who had shot Piers and left him to die. How was it possible that it was the memory of Miss All Sunday, whom she hated so much, that ended up being the one who put her right? "Please, Innkeep-san," Kuina spoke out loud suddenly. "Save this boy too." "Lady Kuina." The innkeeper lowered his voice. "That boy's injuries are far too serious. I don't think there's anything I can do to." "Please," she surprised herself by the earnestness in her own voice. "Please, try." For a moment there was no sound in the room but the hoarse breathing of Straw Hat Luffy as he fought to live. "All right," the innkeeper said finally. "I will tend to the boy." "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet, Lady Kuina," the innkeeper replied as he got to work. "I cannot guarantee this boy can be saved. But you will try." "Yes, I will try." The boy. Pell-sama did not attempt to hide his concern for Straw Hat. Kuina searched for the right words. About his condition is, he's old man. This meat is so good, recovering in the next room. Miat, Kuina had come to the conclusion that she was in some sort of delusional waking dream. This boy could not possibly be Straw Hat Luffy. He must have tossed his hat to an underling with instructions to impersonate the pirate captain's madman impersonation, performance, act, thing. Except that the voice matched the voice of the Straw Hat Luffy she had run into at Nanohana, perfectly. No, there was no way around it. Straw Hat Luffy might be an evil mastermind, but his personality was that of your local village idiot. Or perhaps, he made use of it as a front. Say Kimono-chan, are you gonna eat that? Straw Hat's voice made her jump. Eat? Ah. No, the plate of food that the innkeeper had set before her disappeared before she'd even finished the last syllable. Thanks, that was good. This was too much. You can stop this now. Kuina's voice was low but intense. I know who you are. I know what you are. You can drop the charade. She kept her sword hand ready, waiting for the first sign of hostility before she drew her weapon. It didn't matter if that boy seemed so unthreatening, she knew that she could not, and would not underestimate him. Straw Hat's innocent demeanor fell from him like a sheepskin from a deviously disguised wolf. So you have seen through my disguise, he drawled, his eyes glowing menacingly red as a darkness gathered about him. It's a shame really, because you won't live to tell about it, Kimono Kuina. You were a fool not to have killed me. Now there's no one here who can stop me. I'll kill that old fool of a doctor, and I'll take over that royal guardian's mind while he's helpless. Right after I erase your very existence, of course. She braced herself as his form started changing. It was shifting into something much bigger, an inhumanly dark, draconic form that filled the room. Straw Hat paused in his eating, but for only a moment. You ate a chair? How did you even get that idea? Tremble before my might, for I have swallowed up girls and boys, women and men, kings and emperors, cities and realms. Asterisk. Didn't you say something about a chair that you ate? Her mental image of Straw Hat Luffy, the ancient abomination, shattered into unrecoverable shards as she was overcome with irritation at the boy's unbelievable idiocy. I said, a charade, not a chair ate. You can't possibly be this dense. Just who do you think you are? Straw Hat Luffy, the sinister mastermind who had been the cause of everything disastrous since Shelltown, merely laughed with a mouth full of roasted sand lizard, absolutely unoffended at her harsh words. I'm Luffy, by the way, thanks for saving me, Kimono-chan. Well. You should save your thanks for the doctor and Pell-sama. They're the ones who insisted on it. She couldn't help but be a bit taken aback. Why was it that every little thing Straw Hat did keep throwing her off? He had a deceptively disarming manner about him. But no, she wouldn't fall for his trap. Pell-sama? Is that the white robe guy? That was one way to describe the man, she supposed. Yes, it is him. Is he okay? Her eyes narrowed. Why was Straw Hat expressing concern for Pell-sama? Innkeep-san says he will live, she said at last. Phew. I'm glad. He helped me too, right? That's what I just said. Then he's also nice like you, right? He was calling her nice? Well, I say Kimono-chan, why'd you help us earlier back at Croc's lair? I didn't help you. I came to help Zoro. She wondered if she sounded as ungracious as she was feeling. Oh, so you and Zoro are friends? Were rivals. Best friends. Oathkeepers. Savior and saved. In the middle of trying to explain what Zoro meant to her, she lost her temper. How can you just do that? She raised her voice, not caring if it disturbed the recuperating patient next door. How can you just stand there grinning ear to ear and smile at me and say nice things when you took the only person who ever understood me away from me? Hey, I did that. I'm talking about Zoro, Shelltown. You practically forced him to become a pirate? Straw Hat was silent, but only for a moment, and then he laughed. I see. Well, I guess I did. I helped him get back his katana, so he had to agree join my crew. But Zoro said that it's okay as long as he follows his dream, and he'll leave if I ever get in his way. Actually no, he said he'd kill me if I get in his way, but he probably didn't mean that. Kuina was stunned. You mean he can leave whenever he wants to? If he wants to. I want my nakama to follow their dreams too. I want to be the pirate king and he wants to be the world's greatest swordsman, so it makes sense. He told you about our dream? Oh, you guys have the same dream? We grew up at the same dojo. We both made a promise to become the world's greatest swordsman, until you came into the picture and turned him into a criminal. Why can't he be the greatest swordsman and a pirate at the same time? Well, that's not the point. Kuina was trying very hard to hold on to her anger and hatred for Straw Hat, but for some reason it was failing her and fizzling out miserably. Oh, I get it. You were worried about him because he's your little brother, right? My brother Ace always said that being the older brother he always worries about having an idiot little brother. Ace. The fire pirate from Nanohana. Kuina wondered whether this Luffy was even aware that by idiot brother, Fire Fist Ace actually meant him. But one fact did need correcting. Zoro isn't my brother. We're not related. You grew up together and he's the one who understands you, right? Luffy stated as he inhaled another joint of meat. Why do you have to be related for him to be your brother? For a moment she stopped and sat there dumbly. Straw Hat Luffy might be an evil pirate who was nothing like the evil pirate that she had envisioned, but he was absolutely right. I suppose. She finally managed to stammer, that makes sense. She knew by how his voice sounded. He was grinning at her. See, all you had to do is exchange sake cups and you'll be brothers. Well, maybe for you I guess you'd be a sister. But the thing is, he's a person who is important to you, right? The evil pirate Straw Hat Luffy, who blackmailed noble persons into joining his crew, was dispensing advice on bonding to her. Why, she said faintly. And that's why you came after Zoro, because you wanted to protect a person who's important to you. I am never losing again. I don't want to lose anyone anymore. True. I understand how you feel. I want to protect my nakama too, that's why. Say, do you want to join my crew? What? The non-sequitur question caught her totally off guard. Well, if Zoro's a pirate it's hard for you to keep an eye on him, so it'd be easier for you if you two are pirates together, right? I can't be a pirate. I'm a marine, who nearly killed you in Nanohana, she added mentally. You are? Kuina could tell Straw Hat wasn't really taken aback by this. Are you like Smokey from Logatown? He's my captain. I see. This seemed to stump him for a moment. But only a moment. It's okay, I don't hate him, and since you're Zoro's friend and you're pretty strong, if you ever change your mind and stop being a marine, you're welcome to join us. Right. Thank you. I think I'd better go and check on Pelsama, she said hastily, feeling as though she had been just clouted over the head with an oversized elephant tuna. Okay. The sound of high-speed eating resumed. Kuina removed herself from the room and entered the bedroom in which Pelsama lay, still unconscious. She could hear the sound of his breathing and the rhythm was strangely calming. It also helped her gather her scattered thoughts together. Straw Hat Luffy was nothing like the villain she had imagined. He was in fact, an idiot, and crazy, and not evil. And thoroughly unbelievably likable. At the same time, he did have a rather warped kind of instinctive wisdom. But one thing really shook her. He understood her better than she did herself. It was probably an indication of how seasoned Pell was when he appeared to handle the surprise better than she had. This peculiar individual. Who is he? Does he have a name? His name is Luffy. He is a pirate. The Falcon Man was already attempting to sit up. I would like to meet this boy. Are you sure you should be? Do not worry, I recover quickly. This was not an idle boast. The man did seem to have recuperated quite rapidly. Privately Kuina wondered if it was a bonus devil fruit ability to be able to shrug off serious wounds as if they were mere inconveniences. Here are your robes. The innkeeper had them cleaned while you were unconscious. Pell accepted them gratefully. They've been mended, he noted. It was something to do to pass the time. You're quite skilled with the needle. Oh, I apprenticed under a kimono maker, and the innkeeper had some needles and thread, she said, blushing slightly at the compliment. It isn't that special. Under normal circumstances. Kuina suddenly froze, realizing what he did mean and must have figured out. You don't have to explain anything, Pell tactfully reassured her, his tone changing to a softer one as he did so. My late mother's sight failed her during the later years of her life. I recognize the signs. Oh, thank you. Unexpectedly meeting someone who understood what it was like living without sight put her. He had a rather nice voice, she decided. Soft but steely, with enough gentleness to not sound harsh. It made one fear, respect and trust him. All at the same time. Still, she wasn't sure if she could be comfortable around this man and his uncanny ability to see through her facade. And she was glad when a distraction intervened in the form of the boy's demanding wail. "Old man. More meeatttt. Yes. He is quite lively now," said Pell, noting the boy's vigorous shout as well. "You have done well. I thank you for your assistance. But I'm afraid I do not even know your name." "I am called Kuina. You have my gratitude, Miss Kuina." Involuntarily Kuina flinched. The last person who had called her that had been Piers. That man had to have eyes like a hawk, for he immediately noticed her discomfort. "Did I say something wrong?" "No, it's all right, it's just that it reminded of someone. I'm fine. Just, Kuina, is fine, Pell-sama. I do not deserve that honorific, Kuina. Just, Pell, will suffice." She shook her head. "It seems strange to be just calling you just that, Pell-san. Considering how I owe you a great debt." "For what?" Again, the tone of his voice had changed. This time, it sounded rather wary. "For stopping me back there, when I was stabbing that man." "Do not thank me for that," he said quickly, cutting her off. She could hear the self-loathing in his voice. "You would be thanking a hypocrite." "Hypocrite?" she repeated slowly, not quite understanding. "I stopped you from giving in to your hate and taking your revenge. Yet the moment I heard about Igaram, there I was, intent on doing the exact same thing." He gave a bitter laugh. "And I even failed at that." She opened her mouth, then shut it again. What could anyone say in such a situation? "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said all that. We should just going to go check on Luffy now." Kuina got up and turned to flee, keen on putting some distance between herself and this man whom she had inadvertently offended. But she never got further than that. "How was your friend killed?" Pell asked abruptly, stopping her in her tracks. The question caught her by surprise and she blurted out the answer before she could think. "I don't know if he's dead yet." There was a stunned silence. "You don't know? Take this with you. Report in if you find Captain Smoker or see anything. He's missing, please." Kuina took the Den Den Mushi from Toshigi gingerly, feeling as though if she lost control, she could end up crushing the little creature by accident. But she really ought to have said something to acknowledge the other woman's consideration, so she said it. "Thank you." It wasn't enough. She still felt as though she should explain herself further. "Toshigi. I know I shouldn't leave like this, but if I stay here, any moment Dr. San might come in and tell us that Piers, that he didn't make it. And I can't be here when it happens. I just can't. Toshigi." She could hear her own voice breaking down. This was unlike her. Ichi-san had drilled self-possession and stoicism into her, but sometimes the memory of old, unhealed wounds can easily shatter years of deliberate self-control. She could tell Toshigi was stunned by her outburst. Not knowing what else to say, she turned and fled, away from the ship over which the shadow of death now hung. "I'm a coward," Kuina confessed, hiding her face in her hands. "I didn't even want to face the possibility of hearing the worst. I ran away from it all, with only a flimsy excuse of wanting revenge. Now I don't even know if Piers is alive or dead and I'm too afraid to go back and find out." For many moments there was silence in the room. The desert breeze wafted through the narrow windows. "If there is one thing I have learned from years of being a soldier," Pell's voice was low, and rather thoughtful, "it is that to lose one's fear of death, one needs to learn to face it instead of running away from it." "I'm not afraid of dying," she protested, "but the people around me is another matter." "Is it not the same thing? Life without the ones you care for is the same as death. But in truth, I can tell you that the harsh truth of death is never as bad as your fear makes it. At least then you know." She knew that he was right. Even if she ran away, it wouldn't have made a difference to whether Piers would have survived or not. But since that terrible moment, she herself had been trapped in this tormenting limbo of not knowing. Even if the worst had happened, she could at least have come to terms with what had happened to Piers by now. If only she had the courage to want to know. They sat in awkward silence, with only the sounds of Luffy's high-speed eating audible from the other room. So who was Igaram? It was more for the sake of breaking the silence than anything. She was remembering the unbridled rage in those angrily shouted words from their encounter with Miss All Sunday. "He is the captain of the Royal Alabaston Guard, and to me, a close friend and mentor." At his use of the word mentor, Kuina tried to imagine a male version of Ichi-san, and failed utterly. He was a great man, who loved his country and died to protect it. You would gladly do the same, it was not a question. In a heartbeat. At this an involuntary shiver ran down her spine. Here she was, with her selfish, grandiose dreams of becoming the world's greatest swordsman, while there were people with this degree of selflessness out there. Suddenly Kuina felt very small and petty. Country. What a strange concept to die for. There had never been this feeling of patriotism in her own homeland. Of course she was fond of her hometown and the dojo, but was just the village. Surely it had to be part of a greater kingdom or something, but now that she thought about it, she realized that she had no idea to which country it belonged, and by extension, which country she belonged to. She couldn't help but feel a bit mortified at her ignorance. Pell-san, may I ask you a question? Please ask. Would you work with a pirate to protect something you cared about? To protect my country, I would. And I will judge a person by their behavior first, even a pirate. At this Kuina had a rather uncomfortable reminder of how Pell's first impression of her had been her viciously stabbing away at a man who had ceased fighting back. Pell rose to his feet and made his way stiffly towards the door. Come, we must make a move. I wish to have a word with the boy. So you mean to say that Vivi-sama's plan is to make contact with Koza before the rebellion starts and convince him to stand down? Yep, and I have to kick Crocodile's ass, of course. Kuina wondered how Pell-sama managed to keep all traces of levity out of his voice at the boy's ludicrous pronouncements. This does sound like a plan Vivi-sama would come up with, Pell said thoughtfully. She and Koza have a long history together. Though I am not sure if this would be enough to stop an army of thousands. Once the people have gathered for war, will not be so easy to get them to back down again. Pell-sama had left the rest unsaid, but Kuina doubted Vivi's plan would have worked anyway. She was remembering Logatown, and how a childhood friendship hadn't been able to stop Zoro, who had not been coerced into becoming a pirate after all, from changing his mind. What more an army? But even if we cannot stop the two armies from fighting, we still need to find a way to stop Crocodile. He's powerful, isn't he? Kuina pointed out. Pell remained silent. Kuina guessed that he was remembering his defeat at the hands of Miss All Sunday. If they couldn't even defeat the warlord's partner, what were the chances of them defeating a man whose power even the world government respected? He beat me last time, admitted Luffy. But I found out his secret. I know how to defeat him, it's Puru. Kuina excused herself and retreated to the other room to answer her Mushi. The last a call from her to Tashigi with Straw Hat Luffy's voice in the background. Tashigi, Kuina. Where are you? We're heading out to Alubarna to stop the rebellion. I'll meet you there. What, Kuina, you can't travel anywhere on your own. I know. I've met up with the Alabastan Royal Army. I'm helping them. Silence. Tashigi was obviously expecting more clarification. We had a fight with a Baroque works officer. She had a devil fruit that let her grow arms everywhere. She got away but we're going after them. Will that be all right? The silence on the Mushi spoke volumes. Since her days with Ichi-san, Kuina had always been better at reading silence than any other sound. She could tell that Tashigi only half believed her. All right, her superior said at last. The ship will remain where we docked on the Shandora. Either make your way there or contact me when you get to Alubarna. Of course. After the Mushi went back to sleep, Kuina wondered if she'd been at all convincing in her half-lie. Tashigi put down the Mushi. She wasn't sure what to think about her rival. She wasn't even sure if leaving her alone in Rainbase was a good idea, but this was not the time to worry about one out-of-line soldier. Dr. San. We'll leave the ship here. It's too dangerous to move with all the wounded we have into a war zone. You're really going to run into the capital city by yourself? I will be taking most of the able men with me. The doctor sniffed. What is that smoker thinking, leaving a lady to do his dirty work? We need to stop those criminals from taking advantage of the war situation, Dr. Francis. And we have to find out what happened to Briggs. He won't thank you for it. What? Briggs won't, you know. A more ungrateful bastard never lived. But Doctor, Briggs could be in trouble. You're too kind to people, Tashigi. But that's a good thing. I'll do what I can to support your decision. Tashigi bowed. Thank you. I leave the ship in your care. Then I'll do my best to take command of this ship while you are gone. Toshigi. Yes, Dr. San? Toshigi had already turned to leave. Do what you have to, but don't try to be a hero. Enough have suffered from that delusion. Behind him, the comatose figure on the bed only emphasized his point. Kuina carefully attached Koyajaku to her obi. If they were going to be flying, she would not risk losing her master's sword should they fall. For the last time she drew the blade and listened to the sound of it cutting through the air. Nothing sounded out of order, which meant the blade was in good condition. Satisfied, she resheathed the weapon and vowed it would not be drawn again until her next fight. I have been meaning to ask, what kind of sword is that? Pell-sama's voice jarred her due to its unexpectedness. How could that man move around so lightly and silently in spite of his injuries? We call it a shikomizu, but I'm better with a katana actually. It's a sword that's kind of similar to the one you were using, I think. Well, not that I've tried using your particular sword, but I did use one similar one back in Rainbase. It feels almost like the katanas I used to train with in the dojo back in my homeland. Kuina trailed off when she realized that she was babbling. Why was she babbling? She never babbled. It was always other people who did the babbling around her. And yet here she was, babbling about theory and sword styles in a time of war and probably annoying the Falcon Man out of his mind. Except he didn't seem to mind. In fact, from his tone, her prattle seemed to have amused him. You are a strange one, Kuina. What do you mean? You wield that blade with the skill of a veteran of many wars. Yet from the way you act, you appear to have come from a country unscarred by war or conflict, and where swordplay is revered as a form of art, not as a means of killing people. In a way, it is refreshing. Again, he'd managed to read her through absolutely inconsequential details. She wondered what it was about her that gave away her rustic background. But he was right. You're right. I have never seen a real war, she told him. Then it pains me to know I will be taking a part in destroying that innocence, Pell said. For if you come with us, we will be going into the heart of what may be the ugliest and bloodiest civil war in the history of this great kingdom. I still wish to go, Kuina stated firmly. There was no question to her not going. Even if she wasn't after Zoro and her sword, she knew she couldn't leave Pell and Luffy to face Baroque works alone. Even if Pell did make her feel inexplicably unnerved around him, she wondered if this contradictory feeling of simultaneously wanting to get as far away from him as possible, and at the same time wanting to be in his presence was another side effect of being a devil fruit user. Perhaps having partaken of a fruit that granted one such unearthly powers also gave one a certain type of unsettling aura. She supposed it made sense. Smoker-san was always intimidating and she certainly never felt at ease around the devil fruit user captain either. It had to be more of the same thing, she decided much later as Luffy helped her up on Pell's back. It had to be. Probably. Petty Officer Piers. What in the world are you doing strutting around in that indecent state? It had been another slow day of waiting for the Straw Hats to show in Nanohana. The Marines under Smoker, not being ones to sit around idly, were making use of the extra time to train. Oh, hey, Officer Briggs. The insult slid off the cheery Marine like water off a duck's back. I'm just going for my training session with Captain Smoker, but you know how it is, and since my shirt and Miss Kuina's vest, well, it's not hers but it's the one she made for me, got damaged last time, I decided I'd rather not have Miss Kuina have to re-sew these a third time, so I'm going without today. You wanna come spar too? No, and practice some decency and put a shirt on. There are women present. He pointed to Kuina and Toshigi, who were both overseeing the training on deck. It's disgraceful for a Marine on duty to be walking around in such inappropriate attire. Briggs cut himself off there as Captain Smoker emerged from the cabin. Similarly, attired, he had discarded his jacket, as the heat of the desert island was probably getting to him at last. He had previously been thought crazy for running around in this kind of climate in a jacket with a fur collar. His jute was instead strapped to his back by the means of a leather baldric. Not keen on joining in, Briggs? Smoker inquired mildly. Ah, no, the warrant officer was already en route to making a discreet exit. I have a headache. Going to see Dr. Francis. Both men shrugged at the retreating navigator and got down to training. Soon, the air was filled with the shouts of the two sparring Marines. Well, shouts of encouragement and intimidation from Smoker, shouts of alarm and the occasional just for the heck of it battle cry from Piers. I think Piers-san is improving, Kuina noted as she and Toshigi observed from where they were. Unlike the previous sparring sessions, Piers was no longer being tossed around like a limp rag doll. She noted that Smoker wasn't going all out. Although from the looks of things, Smoker wasn't holding back much, unless you counted not using his devil fruit, and Piers was having to push himself hard just to keep up. Perhaps Dr. Sand's angry tirade last time might have had something to do with it. It was interesting how Dr. Sand was probably the only one on board who did not seem intimidated by Smoker's very presence. Still, Piers Sand is definitely improving in his reaction times, and he's more nimble on his feet too. I can tell that his stances are more steady as well. Was Tashigi's distracted response. She'd been rather quiet since the match had started. Tashigi-san? There was a pause as Tashigi seemed to be tearing herself away from something. You can't see any of this, can you? I'm blind, Kuina began, slightly annoyed. So no, I can't see them, but I have other senses which compensate for it, so I still have a pretty good idea of what they're doing in combat. Kuina. Strange, Tashigi's voice sounded slightly dazed. You have no idea just what you're missing. Kuina responded in confusion. No, I just said, Tashigi-san, I can track their move. Tashigi made a non-committal motion that might have been a wave and went back to watching the match. Kuina took several minutes to puzzle over her behavior. As Piers and Smoker continued to spar under the hot sun, eventually she shrugged it off and resigned herself to the fact that despite the appearance of being sane, everyone on board appeared to have their own little idiosyncrasies. Tashigi, just like everyone else on board, was probably just being weird. Take care, Pell-sama. And all of you. The innkeeper had come to bid farewell. I owe you a great debt for your kindness and hospitality, said the falcon man to the innkeeper. Think nothing of it, Pell-sama. I am a king's man. For king and country, the old veteran replied. And I am honored to have been able to see for myself your famed powers. But if you truly want to thank me, come back here and drink with this old soldier sometime, when this damned war is over. It would be my honor to do so. Goodbye, old man. Luffy, that's rude, thanks for all the meat. The innkeeper just laughed. Godspeed to all of you. It was not long before the great falcon was barely more than a speck in the distant sky. The old innkeeper gazed after them. He wondered if he would really ever see any of them again. At first, Kuina had decided that she liked flying. Or at least, that was what she had thought before the first sandstorms hit. Riding on Pell's back was exhilarating in fine, still weather. For long distances he had a specific flight pattern. Find a thermal updraft, ride on it in an ascending spiral until they were dizzily high. She knew this because Luffy said so. And then glide from the column of rising air toward where they wanted to go until they hit the next thermal current. That was for good weather. In a storm, the air currents buffeted the giant falcon man and he was hard-pressed to stay on course. This was also the point she decided she didn't like flying anymore, because while all these airborne maneuverings were going on, she was terrified out of her mind at the jerking and shaking. Part of it was because she couldn't see, and not having that source of input as to what was going on, her imagination ran wild with worst-case scenarios of Pell losing control and them all plummeting to their deaths. Do not be afraid, Pell said to her, noticing her uneasiness. It will be all right. I won't let either of you fall. I'm not afraid, she tried to lie. A wave of nausea hit her. This was not a good time for her motion sickness to kick in, but you really couldn't pick and choose when you wanted to be afflicted by these kinds of things. In the end she could only clutch on tightly, bury her face into Pell's feathered neck and trust in the royal guardian's flying skills. And pray she wouldn't throw up all over his back. Luffy whooped in exhilaration behind her. He, at least, didn't seem to mind flying. She was almost envious at the way he could be so carefree in such dire circumstances. Just keep your emotions in control, your face an impregnable mask. Ah, Kuina? Yes, Pell-san? Your hold, could you relax it a little? Wow. Oh, I didn't mean to. I'm so sorry. It's all right. It was just getting a little difficult to breathe. His apologetic tone only made it worse. Hey Kimono-chan. Why's your face turning red all of a sudden? Kuina fervently wished the ground wasn't hundreds of feet below her so it could open and swallow her up. And she definitely did not like flying. Alone. She was having to decide everything alone. How could Smoker had just thrust all that responsibility on her like this? Tashigi had never seen a real, all-out war. The peacefulness of the East Blue and Captain Smoker's presence in scaring off most pirates saw to that. But she kept her head, directing her marine squadrons to cover the streets and back up the royal army. If the Marines had to take sides, it would definitely have to be that of the rightful government of Alabasta. Any sign of Kuina? Number ma'am. Hopefully she had gone back to the ship. That would be the best case scenario. It would definitely be an improvement over the situation in Nanohana. The Marines had found a town half razed and ruined when they had arrived, intent on finding out what had happened to their missing officer. The telegraph office was gone. It had been completely obliterated by a looted ship that had mysteriously crashed into the docks. If there were corpses to be recovered from the ruins, the Marines would have to invest a lot of time digging and moving the rubble to find them. Time that they did not have. In the end, all Tashigi could do was do a cursory search, hold a moment's silence for Briggs, and move on to Alubarna. In the streets of Alubarna, as the rebel army approached, Roronoa Zoro faced off against an opponent of a different level from what he was used to. He detested opponents like this. A man whose devil fruit was so absurdly unfair against a swordsman, and to cap it off, wasn't even a swordsman to begin with. I don't want fair. If we're going to be the greatest swordsman in the world, none of our opponents are going to care a whit. No time for whining. If Daz Bones was made of steel, then he'd just have to learn to cut steel before this fight was over. That was all. He placed the Wado Ichimonji into his mouth, tied the black bandana, and got serious. She had been hearing that sound for ages without realizing what it was. It wasn't until Pel-san broke the silence and announced that they could just see Alubarna ahead did she understand the faint murmur that was raising to a dull roar was the sound of war. It was horrific. As Pel flew over the royal square, the tumult of the conflict roared below her. A teeming mass of humanity trying their best to kill each other. It was a forcible reminder that Pel's warning hadn't been just empty words, and the war was indeed as terrible as he had made it out to be. Below her, she could hear the voices by the thousands, and they were screaming, they were crying. And one by one, the voices kept disappearing, tearing a little bit of her soul each time they did, because she knew by their silence that they had died. Kuina, are you alright? Your grip is slipping. Sorry. Kuina regained control over herself. For a moment, the concentrated rush of hatred and killing intent had nearly overwhelmed her. With her control over that mantra ability being barely existent, she'd almost lost herself in the minds and emotions of everyone around her. A dangerous thing to let happen in midair. Thank you, Luffy-kun. The rubber boy had been grasping her obi, just as a precaution in case she slipped off. Pel, how will we find Vivi in all this chaos? I can't even make out a single voice. We'll head straight for the palace. At the very least, we can find Chaka and the king. Below her, another voice vanished, having been silenced by the bite of a palace guard's blade. I hope everyone's all right. Kuina grimaced, trying to block out the unwanted voices the mantra was feeding her. She could barely manage. I'm sure they will. They're all strong. Luffy was so carefree. True. Knowing Zoro, he'll have found some new way of upstaging me by now. Kuina tried to joke as yet another voice vanished in her mind. Far below where the falcon flew, Roronoa Zoro sheathed Wado Ichimonji. Thank you, he said to his opponent. The ability to cut through steel was now his. As he slumped from the injuries sustained in his battle, he didn't know that not too far away, Vivi had stood before the dust storm of approaching horsemen, staring death in the face. But thems had obscured all vision, and the rebel army had not seen the princess, nearly trampling her to death as a result. In fact, it would have been the end of the princess if it hadn't been for the courage of Karoo the riding duck. He also wouldn't know that her successive attempts at stopping the war by approaching the royal palace would also be foiled by the same pirate warlord. It wasn't fair either, but nothing in this entire war had been, really. How could anyone be this cruel? Below her, the crowds roared in rage as the people, her people, fought in their misguided attempts to save the country by killing each other. And all that was keeping Vivi from plummeting into their midst was Crocodile's chokehold on her throat. That monster knew that having to witness this was killing her, and yet he had to make it worse. Crocodile was the type of man who believed in overdoing things. As if pitting the people against each other wasn't enough, there was now the bomb. The arm that held her up slowly dissolved into sand. Now she was hurtling through the air, her dear papa's screams echoing in her ears, the screams of hatred below rushing up to receive her. The Straw Hat Pirates' efforts to get her to Alubarna had been for nothing, just as Pell, Luffy, Chaka and Koza's, everyone's sacrifices had been. It was over. She had failed. She closed her eyes and prepared for the end. Except that it wasn't. Vivi, her eyes snapped open, and there she saw, flying out of the sun, a fondly remembered silhouette rushing towards her. Just in time. If it had been anyone else catching her, she might have been injured, but thankfully it was Luffy whose rubber body cushioned the impact and she survived the plummet. Vivi-sama, are you all right? Luffy, Pell? You came? Tears came to her eyes. All the people she had given up for lost, Pell, Luffy. They weren't dead. They were all right. And they were all here, along with. Ah. For a moment the princess had to rack her mind for the name of the swordswoman from Rainbase. Kuina, the girl supplied between gritted teeth. Vivi noted she looked somewhat ill, in fact too distressed to be offended by the fact the princess had forgotten her name. But it really wasn't the time to be commenting on that. There was a war to stop and then the threat of the bomb. As they descended she told them of it. Luffy, you're all right, I knew it, liar. They had landed in the square below. It was as if the arrival of the three had been the turning point in the battle. Vivi watched with increasing wonder as one by one, members of the Straw Hats emerged from the dust clouds, battered but alive. Kuina-kun, Kuina, Prince San, Zoro. Kuina, this may not be the best time, Zoro began. I was about to say you sound terrible. Did you just lose a fight with my sword? No actually. I just defeated my devil fruit user opponent by cutting through solid steel, with your sword. You're not pulling my leg? You, show off? You were asking for it. You had better not have broken my heirloom sword, Roronoa Zoro. But any quibbling that might have taken place would have to wait until Luffy's extremely important announcement was over. Where's Crocodile? I'm gonna kick his ass, be careful, Luffy-kun. Don't worry, I ate a lot of meat. Turning to his assembled crew, the captain of the Straw Hat Pirates continued speaking. Sorry guys, I lost to that guy once. But I know his weakness now. I won't lose this time. Hurry up with it then. He makes it sound so easy. Vivi could hear the soft mutter from Kuina at Zoro's remark. If anyone can defeat Crocodile, it would be he. Vivi was surprised to hear Pell's encouragement. But in the meantime, we must tend to our other problem. Vivi was promptly reminded of the other pressing matter at hand. Everyone, listen. There's a bomb. It's set to blow up in the square. That got everyone's attention. Well, except for Luffy, who had already vaulted up to the wall to fight Crocodile. And smacked the warlord right in the face. It was possibly the most satisfying thing Vivi had ever seen. She only wished that they had the luxury of standing around and watching. That boy was possibly the strangest person Miss All Sunday had ever seen. As much as she would have liked to stay and watch the ridiculous water Luffy form, they had a schedule to keep. She had an appointment with a very ancient poneglyph in the tombs, and she had no desire to wait any longer to see it. But like all things with a schedule, unexpected things happened keep them from occurring as planned. In this case, the proverbial wrench in the works was a squad of Marines, headed by one warrant officer who was waving a sword. Toshigi didn't need anyone to tell her that this must have been the woman Kuina had mentioned, so she was telling the truth somewhat. The multiple arms sprouting out of the man she held prisoner made it unmistakable. Under these circumstances, no matter who that man was, there was only one thing to do. Let go of that man, ordered Toshigi as the woman strolled down the Alabaston Street as if she owned it. The man, however, seemed to have very little concern for his own life. Instead, he immediately addressed her. Miss Marine, listen to me. There is a bomb set to blow within the hour. Do not worry about me. You must stop it. Who are you? There's no time, just go now, please. Officer Toshigi. I think that man's the king of Alabasta, one of her men said. And they've got the king prisoner? Nico Robin answered for him. Yes, now get out of my way. I won't let you won't let me? The woman repeated slowly and disdainfully. I doubt you can stop me. Her squad of men responded by aiming their rifles at the woman. And then, a terrifying thing happened. One moment the world was normal and the Marines had the upper hand. The next, a forest of disembodied limbs had sprouted out of nowhere and were suffocating and strangling the men before they could react. Toshigi charged with cashew in hand. Even if that woman had a devil fruit power, if she could close the distance and take her down, they might have a chance. But no such luck. Grasping hands pulled her feet out from under her, and when Toshigi attempted to get back up, those arms began attempting to break her legs. It was the most excruciating pain she had ever felt in her life, and Toshigi screamed wildly despite herself. "You look familiar. But you move differently," she said conversationally, as if she wasn't in the middle of breaking the bones of multiple Marines. "I met your doppelganger back in Rainbase," she added. "She doesn't scream as shrilly as you do." Crack. Toshigi could feel something give way, but it hurt too much to tell what exactly. "But I don't think she did any better at fighting me either. I can't imagine why any of you even bother, none of you swordsmen." Her own sword. That monster even turned her own sword against her. Or should I say, swordswomen are a match for me. The realization came as a shock. Kuina, Miss Perfect Swordswoman herself, had lost to this monster? At that moment she wanted to give up. If Kuina couldn't beat this woman, what hope did she, Toshigi, even have? Her body went limp in defeat as the truth sank in. Taking it as the cue that the fight was over, Nico Robin smirked and started moving, forcing her prisoner, the king, to follow. As the smug villain passed her, Toshigi was struck with the thought that she had given up because she knew Kuina had lost. Did she really look down on herself that much? Just because Kuina had failed didn't automatically mean she, Toshigi, would as well. She made up her mind. She would not lose to that woman. Both of them. With the last of her strength, Toshigi grasped the Nico Robin's booted leg as she passed. "I won't let you go. Suit yourself." "I won't either, then." Hands. Strangling hands around her throat. Choking her, making her each gasp for air, a desperate struggle. Those demonic arms had the advantage of leverage, hold and get them off as they slowly constricted around her neck. The lack of air was making her head light and dizzy. The pressure on her throat brought blackness creeping around the edges of her vision. She was going to pass out and die. She was going to die a failure without ever having done anything worthwhile. And she was going to die alone. A shot rang out. The pressure on her throat ceased. As Toshigi gasped for breath, she became conscious of a familiar voice. "Get your hands off my subordinate," as in, literally. "B. Briggs?" The warrant officer was standing on the edge of the building above them, his rifle taking aim at the devil fruit user. He looked somewhat worse for wear, but otherwise functional. Toshigi wanted to scream and warn him the woman was dangerous. Guns were of no use, and goddammit, she was not his subordinate. She held the same rank as him. But right now she really couldn't afford to be picky. "That rifle is Baroque Works property," Nico Robin informed the interloper coolly, after taking him in. "Actually, it's Rebel Army property now. But given that your lackeys crashed a weapons carrier full of these right on top of me, and I might add, as in nearly killing me, I think I'm entitled to keep one." Briggs kept the purloined rifle pointed right at the woman. "Poetic justice, wouldn't you say?" "Then justice is foolish. You should have shot me when you had the chance," Miss All Sunday replied scornfully. Briggs ignored her rebuttal. "You're the devil child of Ohara, Nico Robin," he recited as though from memory. Given his know-it-all attitude, it seemed likely he'd memorized it all. "You have a bounty of 79 million belly." Nico Robin's eyes narrowed. She did not like to be reminded of this, apparently. "Destroyed 6 evacuation ships full of civilians at the tender age of 8. Makes one wonder how much more of a monster you've turned out to be 20 years down the road." No, Nico Robin did not take kindly to this at all, because in a heartbeat, arms had spouted out of Briggs' body and had wrested his own gun out of his hands. He was now looking down at her with the barrel pointed back at himself. "Idiot! Idiot!" Toshigi would have smacked herself on the forehead if she wasn't busy recovering from a bruised throat and legs that felt distinctly detached. He had the chance and he blew it. But Briggs didn't seem duly concerned. In fact, he continued speaking, as though Nico Robin wasn't a trigger press away from killing him. "And the power of a devil fruit. Very interesting. Did you have it while you were still a child? Perhaps you were ostracized during your childhood because of it?" Was he mad, deliberately pissing her off like that? Must have been hard, all those people of Ohara, and you. An outcast amongst your own. Was that why you killed them all when you had the chance? Revenge? She could see Nico Robin was trembling in rage now. Your analysis is flawed, the woman said, controlling her voice with effort, as though she was determined not to let the irritating man get to her. But her remote hands also pulled the trigger. The plan was so ludicrously simple. Luffy would take care of Crocodile, while everyone else focused on finding and disarming the bomb. It was with burning shame that Kuina realized her supposed advantage of being able to use mantra, if badly, and listen to almost inaudible sounds was turning out to be something of a hindrance instead. The reason? It had been rendered almost unusable in the cacophony of war. Firstly, she could barely make out any identifiable sounds in the mayhem. It was just too much noise most of the time. And secondly, even if she wanted to make use of mantra to compensate, the voices in her head were close to driving her mad again. They were different from how they had been in Rainbase. In Rainbase she could feel the deaths of the Baroque Works agents she had slain. And she had in fact reveled in it. But this, in the middle of war. It was like experiencing fleeting moments of dying over and over again. She gritted her teeth. She couldn't fail now. Not when it counted. According to Vivi, if that bomb blew up, they'd all be dead. And she couldn't let that happen. Somehow, they had to find it. As she stumbled around the square, a voice, familiar and welcome, leapt out from the dull roar of war. Oi, what's up with you? Zoro-kun, she acknowledged her childhood rival's presence. There are many things I would like to say to you. But we'll get to settling the question of the ownership of that sword after all this has calmed down, alright? Works with me, but you didn't answer my question. It's just, I can't make anything out in all this noise. It feels like when I was getting used to being blind all over again, except this time it is with hearing. Baka, you should have said something. Why are you worrying about me? Go find the bomb already. As if I would let you wander around directionless in a place like this. Are you lecturing me about being directionless? Look, just shut up and come with me, okay? You can follow me and keep an eye out for the bomb as we run. Zoro smacked himself on the forehead. I mean, just help me look for it. Damn it. He muttered as he gave up. For a moment Kuina smiled despite her situation. Some things never change. Zoro was still Zoro. Tashigi gaped in horror as the gun went off. The discharged rifle fell to the ground, the sprouted arms having vanished from its surface. But instead of Briggs' head exploding from the point-blank shot, he had simply disappeared. For a wild moment Tashigi had thought the disappearance was due some special property of the rifle, but the way Nico Robin immediately went on guard indicated otherwise. It would seem, Nico Robin spoke at last, not to Tashigi, but to the foe that she could not see, that our information network has failed us. We were told that there was only one devil fruit user amongst your group of Marines. Wait, what? What was the woman talking about? Briggs didn't have a devil fruit. Ah, so those two minions of yours didn't report their encounter with me to you, did they? Briggs' voice sounded far away and rather faint, but Tashigi could still hear the mocking smugness in his voice. Minions? Nico Robin's eyes were narrowed as she sought to place her opponent. I believe one of them was that famous assassin Daz Bones, and his companion was a woman with large hips and hair. Let's just say I interfered in their execution of a witness that might have fouled up your little plans, before engaging in a defensive feint maneuver. You mean you picked a fight with them and then ran away, Nico Robin translated. Defensive feint maneuver. Unfortunately the combination of those two devil fruit users together was a bit inconvenient. The voice sounded slightly miffed. And it wasn't my objective to defeat them at that time, so I just did a bit of distracting, led them a merry chase and gave that rather important witness a chance at being rescued. Asterisk. Tashigi could tell by the way the Nico Robin's brow furrowed that she was now worried about the consequences of the two agents' negligence on their carefully laid plans. I can understand why they didn't report our little run-into you, however, as my devil fruit abilities tend to have that effect on people, the disembodied voice clarified. Nico Robin immediately shifted her stance, trying to place the location of the speaker. Even when they're in use, no one really likes to be sure they saw me. So Briggs had a devil fruit after all. They'd been sailing for months together and there had never been any indication. That sneaky bastard had been holding out on them. Invisibility? No, that's not it, she could hear Nico Robin mutter to herself. I'd resolved to never use this form again. A tall, thin shadow fell across the Baroque Works vice president as he said this. But since that flashy smoke logia's already gotten me to break my own vow, I guess there is no reason for me to hold back anymore, is there? The thing that had suddenly appeared was almost enough to make Toshigi scream. Its elongated form towered over them both, a nightmare vision of something that looked like a walking tree demon, or some animated six-legged eldritch entity made of sticks. Yet there was something vaguely familiar about it that had Toshigi certain that that thing before her was Briggs. A fully transformed devil fruit form Briggs. And, it had to be said, an insufferably smug-looking Briggs, which almost ruined the terrifying effect he had been going for. "Your run ends here," Briggs informed the woman. "I'm taking you down, devil child." Nico Robin did not panic. In the flash of flower petals, multiple arms had sprouted and held the transformed Briggs in a chokehold, a pair of arms for each joint, attempting to break the devil fruit user's many limbs. But she was not successful, on the choking at least, perhaps because of the thick bark-like armor that covered everything. Unluckily for you. Briggs began grinning for the first time Toshigi had ever seen him doing, and the effect was so unusual it seemed a bit warped. "You ran into me. You see, when it comes to devil fruit battles, you never know how they match up. In terms of fighting ability, my devil fruit may not be anywhere near the top tiers, but ironically, I may be one of the worst combinations for you to fight." Nico Robin did not answer, but merely tightened her grip. Blinding mist, a rather distinctive smell, somewhat between that of roasting coffee and burning butter, filled the air. Toshigi could feel her eyes water as she instinctively kept them shut. Nico Robin, however, let out a cry of pain and released her hold, her many sprouting appendages disappearing into nothingness. "It burns and stings, doesn't it?" Toshigi sneaked a peek and saw that Briggs had closed the distance between him and Nico Robin. "If the burning spray makes contact with your eyes, it's worse. As in, it causes blindness. Which may be temporary, if you're lucky." Nico Robin glared in return and folded her arms as she prepared to initiate another attack. Briggs merely smiled grimly. "Of course you wouldn't go down that easily. Right. Let's see what you've got, devil child of Ohara." "Kuina, did you find anything?" Pell asked as he swooped down from above. Kuina shook her head. She had been trying her best to listen for what might have been the telltale sign of a ticking bomb, but no luck. "I will keep trying, Pell-san." "Who is that bird guy?" Zoro asked her after Pell had gone on in searching for the bomb from the skies. "He's with Vivi," she replied, wondering why Zoro was suspicious. "Right." They both lapsed into silence again as they concentrated on the search. Time was running out. Toshigi watched as Nico Robin grimaced in pain at the burning spray. It had proved a major deterrent in the use of the woman's trademark attack, but the Baroque Works agent had figured out that the amount of pain she experienced from Briggs' chemical spray was directly proportional to how much surface area made contact with it. So she had changed tactics and was focusing on breaking one limb at a time while using a minimal number of sprouted arms to stay under her pain threshold. This was how, despite the deployment of more of the burning spray, she had succeeded in twisting Briggs' arm behind his back. Toshigi could hear the Marine grunt in pain and drop to his knees. But Briggs appeared to have a fairly high pain threshold of his own, and it didn't seem to faze him much more than that. In fact, even as he felt, Toshigi saw him shift his weight to his multiple other insect-like legs, one of which Nico Robin was still trying to break, and use his long legs to sweep kick Nico Robin off the ground. It was with great satisfaction that Toshigi saw the hated woman hit the dirt, faster than one would have believed for a creature so long and tall. Briggs was already on top of her, his good hand outstretched and ready to deploy his strange burning chemical spray ability. The fight was over, and Nico Robin knew it, but in defeat the woman still retained her composure. "At first I had thought you had some sort of tree-related devil fruit. But you really are an insect-type zone, aren't you?" said she, calmly staring Briggs down despite the risk of being blinded. "I'm impressed, Nico Robin. You're correct. I ate the mushi fruit, stick insect. You're the first one who managed to identify it so quickly and accurately," said the warrant officer as he brought his elongated arm to the level of her eyes. "The genius of Ohara at work, perhaps?" She merely glared at him defiantly, cold hatred in her eyes. "Well, whatever it is, this is the end for you, devil child. I should thank you. My capturing you here today is going to assure me my promotion to Sables." The sand devil that had sprung up from nowhere caught the stick insect man unawares and flung him into a nearby wall. I hear that in the Marine Corps, they give double promotions posthumously, a voice, deep and mocking, announced its owner's presence. When Toshigi saw who it was, her heart sank. Of course, that would suit you just fine, wouldn't it? Former Marine Headquarters Captain, Barkskin Briggs, said Crocodile. It was a long-held superstition of Logatown that the foul weather in those parts was a herald of misfortune. In fact, the older residents of Logatown always insisted that you knew whenever something bad was going to happen, because when it did, the rain fell. The weather should have been the first indication for Toshigi that it would not be a good day. The air was muggy with the kind of pent-up heat that was always followed by a vicious, lashing rainstorm. Sure enough, before the sun even made its way up to its noon seat, she was already wondering if it was going to be one of those days. She tripped over more things than usual, misplaced Shigur, showed up for the wrong training session and made a fool out of herself in front of the men. But those were minor things compared to the scene she'd walked into when she entered Smoker's office. Even with Smoker's short fuse, it was something of a shock to find him wildly yelling at the Den Den Mushi in a wild manner quite unlike his normal self. They can't be serious, yes. They're going ahead with the court-martial. The official charges, negligence in the loss of the Golden Hind and its crew. The Den Den Mushi, which seemed to have developed sweeping eyelashes and mysteriously gained a cigarette, was calmly reading out the charges. That's bullshit. We've all read the reports. Sure, some of the responsibility falls on him as the captain. But his actions afterward couldn't be faulted. Blaming it all on Barkskin is just absolute justice, as they say. There's not much Hina can do. You know how high command, especially Admiral Sakazuki's camp, is. And Barkskin's just taking it. Hina tried talking sense to him at the hospital. All he says is he doesn't need any help. Same old proud, stuck-up prat. Smoker, Hina needs to go now. Don't do anything stupid. Hina has enough to do without having to bail you out again. Smoker scowled at the Den Den Mushi as it went silent, and then finally turned towards where Toshigi stood nervously at the door. You heard all that? Not quite, sir. Only the later part. What happened? Who's getting court-martial led? An old acquaintance of mine from the Marine Academy, Captain Barkskin, Smoker said at last, lighting a third cigar. Damn fool lost his ship to a pirate. Even then it had seemed a bit odd. Marines lost ships to pirates from time to time, and a court-martial seemed excessive. Of course, that was only the first report Toshigi had heard of what would become the infamous Golden Hind incident. She never did know the full consequences of that particular disaster, but never in 100 years would she have guessed how it would come to affect her a year later. Just as you thought you knew someone, they turn around and surprise you. For almost a year Toshigi had been working with Briggs, whom she had assumed to be just a warrant officer who had transferred from another base. For being obnoxious, she had presumed. It was something of a shock for her to discover that he and the Captain Barkskin mentioned over a year ago were one and the same person. That he had once actually had held the same rank as Smoker was definitely something she never could have guessed. But Briggs' previous allusions to Marine HQ and in his experience of the Grand Line suddenly made a lot of sense now. She had often wondered why Smoker, who was usually quite intolerant of irritating people, had put up with someone like Briggs. Now she knew. In hindsight it became obvious that the two of them must have had history. But this was not the time for introspection. Crocodile's appearance on the scene had turned the winning scenario on its head. And he wasn't the type to stand idly by and let his opponents gather themselves for a counterattack. Desert Espada. It was a blade of moving sand, and Toshigi had no doubt that anything it made contact with would reduce to nothing but a trail of blood in its wake. In this case, the person in very real danger of being hit was the still stunned Briggs, who barely had enough time to see the attack coming as he recovered from being tossed into the wall. Briggs! Behind you! The wall exploded into a cloud of sand, crumbling into a mess of broken bricks, but there was no blood. Just a falling shadow. Before Toshigi understood what was happening, something freakishly tall had landed beside her in a flurry of wings that were a rather unmanly shade of fuchsia. Briggs had grabbed her, and before she had time to even register what he was doing, they were both already in midair, high above the tops of the buildings. Unlike how Toshigi had ever imagined flight to be, The two of them seemed to be performing some sort of extremely high jump with a slowed descent. But one thing did bear commenting on even in her shocked state. "Why you have pink wings?" Toshigi stammered through the rush of wind and wings in her ears. "It's not true flight, it's wing-assisted jumping," Briggs replied, apparently not listening to her and assuming she would be stating the obvious. "Can't stay in air for long." As in, wait, what did you say about my wings? She never had a chance to reply, as Briggs had landed on his feet with a jarring thud. Toshigi, ignominiously tucked under one of his distinctly creepy insect arms, decided that traveling this way was one of the most shaky, dizzying and nauseating forms of motion she had ever had the misfortune to experience. They had landed next to the man the king, who Nico Robin had been holding captive. Throughout Briggs and Nico Robin's fight, he had been restrained and forced to stay on the sidelines, but with Nico Robin's earlier defeat, he was now free of the devilish arms that had been forcing him along. She didn't have time to think very much about that, because Briggs, just as quickly as he had done with her, had snatched up the astonished royal, and all three of them were high up in the air again. "Briggs, what are you doing?" Toshigi shrieked as they reached the high point of his jump. "What does it look like I'm doing? We're escaping. But you have a devil fruit? A stick insect zone? Against a bloody sand logia? Are you stupid or something? I don't have a chance in hell of defeating Crocodile?" The insect man's voice was rather panicky, she noted. Suddenly it reminded her of the incident when they crossed the calm belt, when Briggs had panicked at seeing the wave about to crash into their ship. This time, Crocodile was the wave. What? With a sudden jerking stop, they had ceased moving through the air. Toshigi looked down to see a daisy chain of arms holding fast to Briggs' ankle. Just as two more arms sprouted out of Briggs' back and trapped his wings against it. "Oh, bollocks," began her colleague as gravity reasserted itself. There was nothing she, Briggs, or anyone could do in this situation. That last thing Toshigi was conscious of was the ground rushing up to meet them, and Briggs' escalating string of curses as they crashed-landed, hard. When Toshigi came to, she almost wished she hadn't. Everything hurt. But even as her senses returned to her, she realized she couldn't have been out for more than a few seconds. Groaning in pain, Toshigi picked herself up. In the corner of her eye, she could see multiple arms appear from nowhere and drag away the king of Alabasta. "You bloody witch!" Briggs, too, was recovering from the fall. Black blood was running down one side of his face where one of the antenna-like things on his head had snapped off. "So you're a big believer of discretion being the better part of valor, are you?" Nico Robin's voice had an overtone of triumph to it. "Touché. I presume that was payback for the thrashing I gave you just now?" Nico Robin looked disdainful. "Don't flatter yourself. I am simply carrying out my mission and I really can't have you running away with my prisoner. By the way, Mr. Barkskin, I figured out something about your burning mist ability. You can't use it when you have allies in close proximity, can you?" Toshigi had barely enough time to see the split-second face before he disappeared beneath a forest of strangling arms. "Shit, Toshigi, get away, get lost." Here he couldn't continue because one of Nico Robin's arms had chosen that moment to wallop him right across the face. Belatedly realizing she was a liability, Toshigi turned to run, but found her legs firmly anchored to the ground by Nico Robin's devil fruit arms. "You stay there. I need the insurance," Nico Robin said calmly as she resumed trying to snap Briggs' arm, the same one she had attempted to break earlier. "You're especially vindictive today, woman." Crocodile was watching the proceedings with an air of amusement. "I just don't like people who think they're so smart and know everything, but can't even get their facts right," replied his partner, with a little more vim than usual. "Oh, I know enough. About you forked-tongued Oharan devils," Briggs snarled back with gritted teeth. "It was you Oharan's corrupting influence that made even someone like Vice Admiral Saul turncoat." If Nico Robin had been angry before, she was in a complete cold fury now. "Do not speak to me of O'Hara," said the woman, her tone murderous. "Or Saul, for that matter." Her words were interspersed with exclamations of pain from her victim as her sprouted arms increased in their efforts. She was rewarded with a yell of pain as the arm was twisted about 5 degrees in angle it really shouldn't have been able to go. Toshigi felt absolutely helpless, and sick to her stomach at being forced to witness this. Even if Briggs did seem to be bringing it on himself, you had to have a heart of stone not to feel for the man's predicament. And any moment now, his arm was going to be twisted right around and snapped clean off. Just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, Briggs, and the mass of arms that had been holding him captive, suddenly vanished into thin air. Both women stared at the empty space for a moment. Toshigi in puzzlement and Nico Robin in frustration. TCH. He disappeared again. I forgot he had that ability as well. Truth be told, Toshigi had forgotten about it herself. She did hope, however, that Briggs' devil fruit could give him the ability to escape safely, even if it did leave her in something a bind. Nico Robin's arms had returned to her side, but she did not cancel the other effects of her devil fruit power. Toshigi's legs were still being tightly restrained. Crocodile, however, did not seem very impressed. If he's a zone, then I have a very good idea what just happened. Lazily, the warlord dissipated, sending clouds of sand flying in every direction. For a moment, there were only the two women and the captive king standing in the middle of the street. And just as suddenly, Crocodile reformed in the distance, clutching something firmly in his fist. Got you? Thought you could slip past, did you? The warlord's fist exploded into a shower of sand as that something tiny, an insect, that had been enclosed in it, explosively expanded. A tiny, squish-able insect? That is one pathetically weak full-zone form, Crocodile mocked. HMPH. I make the best out of what I get. Briggs had morphed back into his giant half-human form, one of his hands holding the other arm at the shoulder. Toshigi couldn't help but notice the way it was dangling rather uselessly. If Dr. Francis were here, he would probably have diagnosed it as being broken or dislocated. And you got lucky. My camouflage doesn't work as well here as where there are, actual trees about. Otherwise, you'd never have found me. Lucky? Crocodile sounded as though he couldn't believe the Marine's gall. Hey, we'll just see about that. Nico Robin, I'm going to be taking a moment to squash this irritating little bug under my heel. You'd better get moving to the tunes. He's all yours. The woman replied in a voice that implied she wouldn't like to be in the Marine's shoes. Toshigi felt the grip on her ankle disappear. Nico Robin was moving along the street, with the king forced to march along with her. For a moment Toshigi couldn't understand why that evil woman had released her. Then she realized, to her mortification, that it was because Nico Robin didn't even see her as a threat anymore. In a way she was right. Without her sword there wasn't really much Toshigi could do. But she could see her sword Cashew lying abandoned in the dirt, some distance away. She began inching towards it. Behind her, a very one-sided battle had erupted between the two devil fruit users. Briggs was mostly focusing on dodging Crocodile's attacks, and didn't seem able to counter with any attacks of his own. Until Crocodile suddenly charged head-on. Almost by reflex, Briggs raised his good arm in a defensive stance. Burning missed. But Crocodile didn't even flinch as he charged through the cloud of corrosive liquid. Toshigi saw Briggs realize this and attempt to dodge out of the way, but the warlord simply dived under Briggs' outstretched arm and grabbed the insect man's other, broken arm so that he couldn't move away in time. Well, that stung a little, said Crocodile lazily. Tell me, Mr. Know-It-All, do you know what my right hand does? It absorbs moisture. Even in dire straits, Encyclopedia Briggs' information dispensing characteristics stayed true to form. Good. I'm so glad I don't have to explain this to you. Toshigi watched, in what seemed like horrifying slow motion, as the entire limb began to shrivel. In desperation, Briggs raised his other hand and attempted to punch through Crocodile's face to make him release it, but with no effect. The alarming withering continued to spread. Briggs, she couldn't just stand there helplessly while her colleague was reduced to a mummy before her eyes. Thinking quickly, Toshigi snatched up Cashew, and ignoring the pain in her leg, charged the warlord. Her strategy had been to cut off Crocodile's right hand and free Briggs, but the insect man had read her intention. With unexpected swiftness, he wrenched himself free and staggered in Toshigi's direction. As Briggs stumbled towards her, shifting out of his zone hybrid form into his human one, all Toshigi's horrified mind could register was that Briggs' withered arm had been torn off at the shoulder and was still left clutched in Crocodile's hand. Yet despite this grievous injury, instead of scrambling to safety, the maimed Marine officer deliberately stood in the way between her and Crocodile, effectively blocking her attack. Toshigi, stay out of this fight, Briggs gasped, his now human face pale and partially withered from Crocodile's attack. In fact, he looked almost more grotesque than his devil fruit form. Don't get involved. Briggs, this is not the time to be. I can fight. In response, he whirled around and dropped her with a punch to the gut. Tears filled Tashigi's eyes as she doubled in pain and fell to her knees at the unexpected attack. For the record, it's not because you're a woman, but for stupidity's sake, open your bloody eyes. This is the grand line, swords cannot harm that man, and he will kill you if you interfere. Then in a low whisper that she could barely hear, no sense doing anything by half measures. I'll occupy Crocodile. You stay down, wait till it's clear and then go. It didn't make any sense. Her selfish, arrogant and thoroughly unpleasant colleague was preparing to die fighting Crocodile for her. Why would someone like Briggs even? Why are you doing this? His answer was the last thing she expected. Because Smoker is a royal pain in the ass, that's why. The door to the navigator's room burst open. Captain, you're dripping water all over the floor, Briggs complained, barely looking up from his maps. Couldn't bother to change after that swim of yours in the comm belt? Smoker wordlessly walked up to the desk and slammed his fist into it, sending papers and pens flying. What is your problem? Snarled the navigator as he scrambled to save his work. Tashigi nearly got herself eaten by a sea king back there trying to save me just now, Briggs. That's the pro. That foolish girl's far too impulsive, just jumps into situations that are way over her head. Smoker's response was to grip the man by the collar and throw him out of the navigator's chair and onto the floor. Have you gone mad? Briggs was backing away slowly after he had righted himself. Stop playing around already, Briggs. You know perfectly well that all that could have been over in seconds if you weren't such a stubborn jackass. It's one thing to hold a grudge against Marine High Command. But when a Sea King that shouldn't even have been a problem for you to handle comes by, and you just keep holding out and putting the lives of my men in danger, that's going too far. Hey, I shot at it like a normal lowly warrant officer would have, didn't I? Except you're not, except I am now, bloody hell, Smoker. If you're so upset over your protégés nearly getting themselves killed, maybe you should have bothered training them with a more realistic assessment of their own abilities. Briggs retorted hotly. But no, instead you had to go and add a new protégé to your collection now, as in next thing you know that backwater fisherman's going to think he can take on the entire army because you said so. Well, if you want to lead your men to their deaths, that's your problem, not mine. The way I do things, my own people can take care of. My protégés didn't get my own crew to mutiny against me, Captain Barkskin. There was an awful hush in the navigator's room, as if Smoker just had crossed the line. That was low, Smoker, Briggs said at last, although his voice had lost its arrogant edge. Yes, it was, Smoker admitted. You knew my terms when you got me into this madman's endeavor with you. No means no, never again. The navigator's hands were clenched as he said this. Smoker remained undaunted. Briggs, how you want to spite the higher-ups is none of my business, the captain said as he paused on his way out the door. But Tashigi and the others are members of my crew. And so are you. They're your people now, remember that. Why you? Briggs was still speaking in a low whisper. Don't argue with me, the king. You heard what he said, the outcome of this fight isn't important. We'll all be dead anyway unless someone can stop the bomb. Now don't go spoiling my fun, Barkskin. Crocodile, using Briggs' own detached arm as a grotesque club, had savagely struck the man from behind and sent him sprawling into the sand. Then he turned to Tashigi, who despite herself, had given an involuntary scream. Well, do we have a new challenger? Asterisk. Tashigi froze with fear. Part of her wanted to pick up her sword and run Crocodile through with it, while the other part knew very clearly that it would be futile. Briggs was right, she had no chance of defeating that man. Where's that boss of yours? Did he run away with his tail between his legs and leave you and this washed up has been to handle things? Smoker Sand did not run away, only dry, mocking laughter in response to her protest. Oh really? Why don't you ask your one-handed disgrace over there if he thinks the same? After all, he would know all about that, Crocodile smirked, turning to Briggs, who was trying to get back on his feet. Wouldn't you? Barkskin? First thought Marine HQ kicked you out of the Grand Line after the Golden Hind incident. I'm sorry, Crocodile. You're talking about a washed-up has been without a hand? and who got kicked out of the ocean he couldn't handle. Toshigi knew Briggs was trying to shift Crocodile's attention from her back to himself. But he must have some sort of death wish to resort to that line of taunting. Are we talking about me, or you by Whitebeard? Briggs really did have a remarkable talent for pissing people off, Toshigi reflected. Even she could detect the change in Crocodile's composure at this jibe. Hit a nerve, did I? It was defiant mocking, done the way only that maddening man knew how. Crocodile seemed to agree. I've had quite enough of that mouth of yours. If you want me to shut up, Mr. New World Reject, you'll have to catch me first, taunted Briggs, right before he turned around, transformed and fled with Crocodile in hot pursuit. Leaving Toshigi alone, and feeling more confused and lost than she had ever been in her life. The first time it happened, Kuina had brushed it off. The voices were disappearing in her head at an alarming rate, and one more really didn't make much of a difference. At least, that was what she told herself, even though her heart was telling her to pay attention, because the voice that had disappeared was special. But she couldn't figure out whose voice it was, except that it was familiar. She hoped it was not Luffy's because it did not bode well for the progress of his fight with Crocodile. So she said nothing, because Zoro was next to her and instinct told her not to bring it up when she was unsure of anything. The second time it happened was much later when out of the muddle of voices, she thought she recognized another familiar one. But just as she caught the snatch of sound, it had disappeared. Another unidentified voice disappearing into the horrible nothingness. She wondered whose voice it had been. Why do you keep doing that? Zoro's voice cut through the dull roar of the war. Huh? You're slowing down and dragging your feet, are you tired? Me? No, it's just, do you think the others will be alright? Zoro's voice was terse. Every moment was now a moment closer to destruction. If we don't find the bomb, it won't matter. But I have faith in my crew. Crew? It reminded Kuina of the fact that somewhere in this great city, Toshigi and her crew of Marines were probably running about doing goodness knew what. With a cold thrill of fear she suddenly realized that if they failed to stop the bomb, Toshigi and the rest of the crewmen she had come to know would be dead before they even knew what was coming. Was Captain Smoker around as well? Could a bomb kill even a Logia user like him? As Kuina ran alongside Zoro and searched, she fervently hoped that all of her crew would come out of this alive. Still alive, Barkskin, the remaining hand of the battered figure that was lying prone on the ground twitched, before shakily forming a very rude gesture. It was promptly stomped upon by a very expensive shoe. Impertinent, Crocodile resumed grinding his victim's face deeper into the dirt with his other heel. I'll give you credit for one thing. You haven't begged for your life so far. Pirate trash. Like you? Keep. Dreamy, Crocodile chose this moment to pick Briggs up by the back of his head, only to slam him face first into the ground again. The Marine groaned, then finally lay still, as if inviting Crocodile's inevitable coup de grace. But it never happened. What are you waiting for then? Finish it. Crocodile kicked his defeated opponent over so he could laugh in his face. Oh no. Death by my hands really is a bit too good for a worm like you, Barkskin. Killed by a Shichibukai. That was what you wanted, wasn't it? Dying a hero? The warlord gave another dry, nasty laugh and continued. No, you can just lie here and wait to die when the bomb explodes. Just like everybody else. Yes, lie there and die in disgrace, knowing that the rest of your men abandoned you, again. With this Crocodile laughed, turned on his heel and left the expiring Marine officer lying like a limp rag doll in the dust. That is. If you last that long. Toshigi stumbled through the streets of Alubarna, past the bodies of men, unheeding of the conflict that raged on either side of her. Useless. She was completely useless. Never had she loathed herself as much as she did now. She was supposed to be a warrant officer, a Marine who had been considered the best swordsman in the Logatown base. And yet in the midst of this war, not only had she been unable to help at all, she'd been dead weight. Now all she could do was run blindly around this massive city looking for a bomb she had no idea how to stop. Captain Smoker. Why'd he end things? I'm useless, where's Crocodile? Toshigi's eyes widened as she recognized the boy in front of her. It was Straw Hat Luffy. How long had she been standing there wallowing in useless self-pity? Here was a chance for her to redeem herself at last. Maybe she couldn't stop Nico Robin. Maybe she couldn't even find that bomb. But at least she could apprehend the pirate they had chased all the way from Logia town. Sword-chan, where did that stinking crocodile go? I lost just now, but I need to find him again and beat him. Beat him? Beat the invincible warlord? Is he serious? Tashigi's mind was trying to adapt to her current situation. She pointed to the direction she had come from. There. Wait, no, he was there. But he'll have killed Briggs by now. He'll be heading on to the tombs, that way. Thanks. Without a second's hesitation, the boy was running in the direction she had pointed. Then a shiver of horror ran through her. What had she just done? She, a marine, helped a pirate? What was she doing just letting him get away? No, that isn't important right now, she reminded herself. The bomb. That's the important thing. Even if she could catch Straw Hat, if it detonated, they'd all be dead anyway. How much time do we have left to stop that damn thing? A voice filtered through the dull roar of the battle in the distance. That voice. It sounded like Roronoa Zoro. Tashigi soon spied a familiar silhouette moving through the dust clouds towards her. As the figure came closer, she could see it was indeed her long sought-after quarry, and he was accompanied by another person who looked extremely familiar. Zoro-kun, are you sure we're heading the right way? The noises are getting softer. Kuina? Yeah, don't worry about that. Just focus on finding the bomb, oh crap. He had spotted her and promptly froze like a startled deer that had been caught out in the open. What is it? Said Kuina. For some reason Tashigi's rival seemed rather disoriented and hadn't sensed her presence. We're going this way. Tashigi saw the burly swordsman grab her rival's arm and pull her away in the opposite direction. There was no mistaking their body language. It was friendly. First Straw Hat was looking for Crocodile, and now Roronoa and Kuina had teamed up to look for the bomb. That girl was unbelievable, and she was supposed to report to her if she made it to Alubarna. For a moment Tashigi felt a sense of vindication. So Kuina was up to something after all. Insubordination. Consorting with the enemy. Once this war was over, she, Tashigi, would have enough grounds to get Ms. Perfect Swordswoman thrown out of the Marines. That was, if they ever got out of this alive. Suddenly it sank in that she was being incredibly petty, and this wasn't the time. The lives of everyone in the city, including the Marines she had brought with her, were dependent on her making the right choice. She wasn't going to screw up. Not when what she needed to do had already been told to her so plainly. If the Straw Hat Pirates were working against Crocodile and trying to find the bomb too, there was only one thing she could do. Help them. Tashigi reached for the baby Den Den Mushi in her pocket, and began making calls. Purru purru purru. Oh, you have a baby Den Den Mushi? Be quiet. I'm not supposed to be Tashigi-san, yes I know I was supposed to have called you when I got to Alubarna but… Oh. Kuina trailed off, as if at a loss for words at what was being said by her superior officer on the other side of the line. Why yes ma'am. We'll move that way at once. There was a pause as Kuina turned away from the little communication snail. Zoro-kun, you got us lost, didn't you? I didn't get us lost. That was Tashigi-san. She says she can see us, and we're running the wrong way and out of the city. There was a pause as Zoro turned around. How did the city get so far away? She also says she cannot believe you have a sense of direction that bad and your swords must be crying at being carried around by an imbecile like you. Why that tell her to shut the hell up, but they also turned around and ran back towards the city. Nico Robin lay on the cold floor of the tombs, her lifeblood spreading out in a crimson puddle beneath her. So this was how her end would be. With the failed backstabbing of a man who had planned to betray her from the very beginning. The poneglyph hadn't been the one she was looking for, but at the very least, she'd managed to deny Crocodile what he sought. The secrets of Pluton would die with her and that monster would never lay his hands on it. Even if the world had rejected her, she still could never have unleashed such a horror upon it. Not out of spite. Not even for revenge. No, even when she had nothing to lose, she would not be what that damned know-it-all Marine the whole world believed she was. Not a criminal. Not a murderer. Not a devil. Just a woman tired of hunting for the truth, and being hunted for it. Perhaps it was fate that at least, she should die in a tomb rich with the historical significance that she revered. But if she thought that she could just expire quietly there and then, she soon found herself to be mistaken. A section of the wall suddenly caved, and that strange rubber boy, Monkey D. Luffy, made his entrance. Crocodile. A rematch was on. For the satisfaction of seeing Crocodile get his comeuppance, Nico Robin hung on to life for a little while longer. There he is. It's Roronoa Zoro. Great, Marines ahead. You'd better let me fight them so you won't get in trouble with your troop, Zoro said to Kuina as both of them raced down the street. Hopefully, they were moving in the right direction this time. Actually, I think I already am in trouble, said Kuina. She was still thinking over what she would say to Tashigi if they met again when she suddenly realized that there was no hostile intent emanating from the Marines who barred their path. Had they recognized her? However, as it turned out, it was not her the Marines were focusing on. Roronoa Zoro. We were told you had no sense of direction, but this is ridiculous. Go back and turn right. Head straight north. Why aren't they attacking? Zoro asked her, confused. Shouldn't the question be why in the world are they giving you directions? She whispered back, just as confused. North. Are you stupid or something? Hey girl. Explain to the idiot he's moving in the wrong direction, would you? Girl? It was then when Kuina realized that once again, her kimono and makeup made her unrecognizable to her fellow crewmen. After all, the only people who had really seen her with it before she had joined the Marines were Piers, Captain Smoker, Tashigi, the doctor and maybe Briggs. None of whom were present. Hurry up and go already, Cripes. Look. There's a smoke signal there, in the sky. Just head towards that direction. The Marine, whose voice was familiar but whose name escaped her at the moment, was speaking to them in a manner one might address a 5-year-old. Zoro, still confused, but tired of being treated like an idiot, grabbed her by the hand and ran. Behind them, Kuina could hear the Marine yell. Right. Turn RIIIGHT. This was followed by another sudden change in direction from Zoro. What the hell is going on? Zoro grumbled as they moved. He let go of her hand again. I think. Kuina began slowly, as she forced her mind to work amidst all the voices crowding it. Tashigi must have told to them help us as well. Mentally she calculated the time and the relative position of the sun using that. She kept the sun on the correct side of her so she knew she was heading north. Worry about it later, Zoro. Just keep going north for now. The Marines were right. They were getting near again. She could, now that she had more time to get used to the cacophony of voices, sense a familiar presence ahead. Vivi and another of the Straw Hat Pirates. Vivi, Kuina. What's going on? The Marines just helped us, did you do something? Well, not Q, wishing she had thought of it before Tashigi had. Have you seen any of the others? I haven't. Zoro, have you? There was no response. Zoro? Said the somewhat confused voice of the other pirate that had come with Vivi. And a lengthy pause in which Kuina realized, with no small amount of consternation, that her childhood rival had lost her somewhere further back and she hadn't realized it. She sighed. Zoro. He really hadn't changed at all. Where is that crazy girl? She was with me just now. Zoro was of half a mind to go back and look for Kuina, but she had said to keep going north, so he kept going. It was not time to worry about that though, because there was still the issue of the bomb and they were running out of time. He supposed wearing that kimono made her run slower than usual and wondered why she still insisted on wearing it. That old kimono maker had really impressed on her some odd habits. All this Zoro thought while he kept running up the stairs. North. The bomb is in the clock tower. I'm sure of it, Vivi's voice rang with conviction. They were all standing at the base of the clock tower in the palace square. At least, according to the others, it was a clock tower. Kuina decided she would have to take their word for it. She was busily occupied at the moment fighting off a pair of Baroque Works agents who had apparently decided to go after the princess again. These were no more than rabble, and waved the swords they wielded around as though they were a pair of feather dusters. Wow, you're just like that other Marine woman swordsman who saved us. Are you too relent? No, she said firmly as the two Baroque Work agents went down. Is that all of them? The male pirate, whose name she didn't know, was obviously intimidated by her. Yeah, thanks. Nice, Kimono-chan. Another one of the pirates, the girl, had joined them in the meantime, accompanied by the young pirate boy with the cute voice from Rainbase. They hadn't been successful in finding the bomb either, so the only hope they had now was in Princess Vivi's lead. But the question was, could they get up there in time to stop it? It seemed unlikely. To get to the entrance and climb that many flights of stairs would take them more time than they had. If only Pell were here, he could stop it. Kuina silently agreed, trying to ignore the way her heart suddenly jumped to attention at the mention of the Falcon Man's name. The princess was right. Only Pell could make it up to the tower in time. But where was he? Could she find him with her mantra, in the middle of this chaos? If she could find him and tell him where the bomb was, then they still had a chance. It was asking to be driven into madness in the middle of this hailstorm of emotions, but in desperation, she caved. Withdrawing into herself and the sea of voices, the churning cacophony in which many voices kept disappearing as they fell prey to death, she explored them all. It was frightening, horrifying, to feel the voices of minds that sought nothing but killing and in which she could so easily lose herself. But she did it, searching through each of them for that one voice. And she found it. He wasn't too far away, and was worriedly searching from them. Pell, her own voice sounded alien to her, it was so high-pitched and out of control. Behind her she could hear Vivi pivot around, looking up to the skies expectantly for the airborne guardian, but the princess had misunderstood her cry. She'd screamed because just as she had found him, she'd felt his voice silenced, and a rush of his emotions in the moment it happened. It was a confusing rush of pain, despair and regret at failing them. A bullet. He was hit by a bullet. Kuina, where are you going? The voices were fading behind her, to be swallowed up by the roar of the crowd. She was running, blindly running, dodging blows and strikes meant for others, her heart pounding harder and more painfully than she had thought possible. But she didn't care, she kept running. Kimono-chan. Still she kept running. Pell couldn't be dead, he couldn't be. Her hair whipped against her cheek and she could hear fluttering of her silken robe in her mad rush. The wind was in her ears, the fading echo of his voice in her head. And still she didn't understand why suddenly, she was so horribly afraid. No, the silence of the moored marine vessel was all she needed to know that it was too late. Her feet stumbled across the wooden deck, littered with the debris of a fierce battle. So horrified she was deaf to everything but the voices she couldn't hear, and she nearly tripped over it. She half fell, making contact with the yielding softness of a human body. Her trembling hands quickly recognized it as what she had feared it was. Piers. Except that it wasn't him anymore. It lay motionless, and sticky and reeked of blood. It wasn't the him she knew anymore, he had been reduced to an it. The thought of it made her mind reel. That thing, lying there couldn't be her cheery, talkative friend who had helped fill the void since her estrangement from Zoro. No, her lips moved, but the only sound that she could hear was her own intelligible scream that echoed along the banks of the Sandora River. Its tone conveying everything that weak words could never say. She'd gone out to a world she couldn't see and she hadn't been afraid because he had always been there to guide her, and now, he was gone. No, a person couldn't be reduced to a lifeless mass of flesh just like that, in a matter of hours. No minutes, no seconds. They just couldn't. Her breath was catching in her throat, but Kuina kept running. Was it the fear that had temporarily cleared her mind? She knew, without any doubt, that ahead of her, 2 rebellion army soldiers were staring at something in astonishment. No one else fighting in that portion of the square seemed to have noticed it. As she neared them she could hear their conversation. What was that just fell? Is that Pell the Falcon? It is. Fate must be with us. He's the captain of the Royal Guard. If we get rid of him it will be a great blow to the Royal Army. But he's already down and out. Exactly, we'll never get another chance to take his head. Wait. I don't think we should. There was a note of hesitation in the voice of the second rebel, but it was too indecisive to make any difference and was dismissed by the first. Don't lose your nerve. We're doing this for the people, for Alabasta. As the rebel raised his saber and prepared to bring it down upon the fallen guardian, Kuina darted in between sword and target, deflecting the blow. You will not touch him. Where is your honor? Her blood was boiling over. Attacking someone when they were already down. Don't interfere, warned the rebel, reaching for his rifle. He found himself screaming in pain a moment later as the girl unhesitatingly brought her sword in hard, piercing him through his shoulder and arm. His weapon clattered to the ground. As for you, Kuina turned her attention to the other rebel, pulling her sword out of the first rebel, and eliciting another scream as the man fell, and pointing its stained blade at him. In her anger at their cowardice, She raised her weapon, prepared to take his worthless life. Kuina, do not kill them, she froze. Pell had risen to his feet behind her, shakily, but alive. Pell, but they were about to kill you while you were down. The Falcon Man shook his head determinedly. He is still a citizen of Alabasta. We mustn't fight each other. Pell-sama. The remaining unharmed rebel blurted in terrified surprise. Your name's Taka, isn't it? Pell said, turning to address the remaining rebel. I remember you from the Equinox Day training exercises. The man's voice trembled as though he had seen a ghost. Pell-sama. I'm sorry. There was a clatter as he threw down his weapons and fled in shame. Wordlessly, they let him go. I didn't mean to sound ungrateful, Pell said. Had gone. Thank you, Kuina. I'm just glad you're all right. She wondered if it was the heat of the desert sun that made her cheeks flush so suddenly. That rebel was someone you knew? He was formerly a member of the Royal Army. He defected. Pell made as though to move, but she could hear the gritting of his teeth and the strain in his voice. You're injured. It is not important. Kuina Vivi, the bomb. The bomb. In her rage at his falling, she'd almost forgotten why she had been searching for him in the first place. Surely they had run out of time? Even as she fought down the wave of panic at realizing that by rights, any moment of thundering explosion would finalize their demise, a scream filtered through the sounds of war. Vivi, her voice shrill and desperate. Whether it was her mantra sense, or her keen hearing, or some combination of both, she picked up on the princess's cries, the words sending a fresh chill down her spine. They'd found and stopped the bombers while she was away, but it had been for naught. The bomb itself had had a backup timer. There had never been a real chance at stopping it at all. The more she listened to Vivi's cries, the more the mantra began to affect her. Once again, she could feel the other's emotions of panic, and the other girl's cries of frustration and despair began to overwhelm her, powerless. She was going to die, in a land far away from home. Everyone was going to die, and both she and Zoro would never fulfill their promised dream. Kuina, focus. She suddenly realized she had spaced out. Pell was gripping her by the shoulders and shaking her lightly to bring her back. The bomb, where is it? Pell didn't have her sense of hearing. He hadn't heard Vivi's voice. He didn't know what was going on. The clock tower, Vivi and the others, they found it, but they can't stop it. She stopped speaking then because even before she had finished her sentence, Pell had released his grip, leaned forward, and embraced her. The clock tower. Thank the gods, Kuina froze. She could tell it was a very rare and impulsive action for the otherwise stoic soldier, one born out of the extremity of the moment. Still, that did not make it any less terrifying, or confusing. He smelled of feathers and face paint, and she could feel his heartbeat, like the fluttering wings of a bird. She wondered why she was focusing on such trivial things like that now. It didn't last long. He pulled away just as swiftly, as though he had steeled himself and come to terms with what he was going to do. Take care of this for me. Something heavy was being thrust into her hands, and she realized that it was his sword. And just as all this was happening, an abrupt glimpse of the future flashed through her mind's eye. Magnificent wings, flying into the sun. What was this dread, this unbearable feeling of impending loss? He was a great man, who loved his country and died to protect it. You would gladly do the same, in a heartbeat. She understood it now. He was handing his sword over to her because he knew he wouldn't be needing it again. And what was more, he knew that she knew. Pell, she could only say dumbly at last, the tone of her voice pleading. He let go of the sword, leaving it in her hands. She could feel the warmth of his hand where he had held it. Even in this desperate moment, it filled her with that same strange, thrilling emotion as when he had embraced her, both terrible and wonderful and it was then, in this most inappropriate of moments, when she finally understood why. Her mind reeled in shock at her sudden epiphany. No, impossible. How could this happen without my being aware of it? Do not grieve over much. She knew Pell was smiling at her, even if she couldn't see him do it. It will be all right. I will not let everyone die. Suddenly she had a glimpse of his mind, and she realized that he had no idea. She herself had no idea whether she should be relieved that this was so. But even in her state of conflicting emotions, one thing she understood very well. He had decided on his fate, and she couldn't possibly undermine his resolve. Saying anything now would have been the wrong thing to do. and so she fought her own selfishness in an eloquent silence. He mustn't have any idea, and yet, she wanted to say something, to acknowledge the greatness of what he planned on doing, but nothing coherent found its way through. And then the chance was gone. I must go. Kuina, thank you, for everything. In a whirl of feathers and wind, he left, to do what no one else could. Unbeknownst to the raging hordes below, the bodies of several prominent royal guardsmen were sprawled on the cold white stone of the palace, now stained red. One of them belonged to the man who had, until he had been soundly taken down by Crocodile, commanded the royal army. A lesser man would have died. General Chaka, the jackal, however, had not gained his position through nepotism. His devil fruit may have paled in comparison to his friend the Falcons, and though he had been denied the title, the strongest in Alabasta, to his friend because of it, it didn't mean it didn't have its strengths. One advantage Chaka always had over Pell was an incomparable sense of hearing and a decidedly uncanny sixth sense. One that managed to rouse him just in time, to hear the grief-laden scream of their beloved princess, and translate the sound into a word, a name. The name of the man he could see in the distance, who was flying, carrying something large and black high into the sky. Chaka knew what it was. He knew what Pell intended to do. He knew it was the only thing they could do. He also knew what the outcome would be. But in the days to come, he never forgave himself for not being do anything to change it. The roar of war was nothing to Kuina's ears now. There was only the flap of wings, the slow ticking of the bomb, and over it all, Vivi's heart-wrenching scream. Helpless. There was nothing she, a mere swordsman, could do. Helpless, she could only sit and listen as a single man bore a terrible burden high into the skies where it could do no harm. Helpless, she waited. Helpless, she could only clap her hands over her ears as the roar shook the skies, the shockwave shattering glass and knocking her down to the ground. But all that was nothing compared to the pain when somewhere, deep in her recesses of her mind, a voice both steely and soft, wonderful and terrible, vanished into silence. They did it. Tashigi didn't bother wiping the dirt streaks off her glasses. She was too busy feeling relieved. Those pirates found the bomb after all. That flash in the sky just now, was that the bomb? One of the Marines with her asked. Could it have been anything else? We're saved. But what do we do now, Officer Tashigi? We stop Baroque works, said Tashigi with renewed determination. She had had enough of feeling useless. Take down or arrest any of their agents that you can identify, and don't hesitate. As the last rumbles of the explosion faded away, Kuina attempted to gather her scattered wits. Pell had done it. She should have been relieved that they were all saved for now. But he was gone and there was a burning pain in her heart that was quite unlike anything she had felt before. I didn't just fall for someone I've known for less than a day, she told herself, dazed. No, that was the kind of thing the silly, girly protagonists of those romantic stories you heard the village storyteller talk about did. She, Kuina, who was neither flighty nor obsessed with men, knew better than that. Or at least, that was what she told herself. I have a goal, a dream. I made a promise to become the greatest swordsman in the world. I never desired romance, it would only be a burden. Why did her words sound so hollow and false, even to herself? Unbidden, Mahawk's voice suddenly echoed in her head. Only a fool cuts down a sakura tree before it has had a chance to blossom. To her horror, she felt tears well up in her eyes. She thought she had understood words back then. But in hindsight now, why was she seeing a whole new interpretation to his words? No, it would be ridiculous to have said that she had feelings for a stranger she had only just met. But she would be lying to herself if she denied that she had developed something in that short time she had known him. She hadn't fallen in love, but the true tragedy was, she very well could have. But there had never been a chance. There had never been time. Pell had exited her life just as abruptly as he had entered it. Now he was gone and she was left behind, with nothing but a sword and the shattered remnants of her own treacherous heart. Overhead the sun seemed to dim, as if to show its respect for the fallen hero. She wouldn't cry. This wasn't the time to dissolve into tears over what could have been. That man had sacrificed himself to save them all and stop a war, and she wasn't going to dishonor his memory by. It was then when she realized that the sounds of fighting had started anew. In the distance, she could hear Vivi's shrill voice, hoarse with grief and loss, screaming, madly screaming. Stop fighting. Everyone, stop fighting, unbelievable. They'd stopped the bomb and saved the lives of everyone, but the royal army and the rebels were continuing their attempts at killing each other again. Rage at the ingrates flooded through her. Her hands trembled as she clenched them. Pell had died for nothing. Nothing, everyone, please stop fighting. They can't hear you, Vivi. No one can hear. No one heard her voice either. But in the scheme of things she, insignificant little kuina, didn't matter anymore. What good was wanting to be the strongest swordsman in the world, if in all of this war, even her skill and strength couldn't do anything to stop this madness? At the end, the only thing she could do was just grieve. No, this was not the time. She would not cry, she would not cry. But she could hear the droplets falling onto the desert sand, and the thirsty ground greedily drank them up. Except they weren't her tears. In wonder she turned her face upward, as the stinging drops made contact with her skin. Around her, the roar of war was fading into astonished silence. She hadn't cried for him, but it was as though the very skies of the country had decided to cry in her stead. After 4 years of drought, it was raining in Alabasta. It's raining, Tashigi looked up in wonder as the thick heavy drops began to blanket the capital city. Officer Tashigi. There's something going on the square. I think the rain's gotten everyone to stand down and now they're talking. I think that's the Princess of Alabasta talking to them. It was true. The falling rain seemed to have sapped away the bloodlust of the gathered combatants, and over the fading tumult of war, a single voice, fair and clear, spoke calming words. Good, that's a load off our shoulders. But even as Tashigi said this, she turned and ran back in the direction she had come from earlier. Officer Tashigi. Where are you going? One of the men called after her. All traces of hesitation were gone from her face. We Marines don't abandon our people. There's something we still need to do. Kuina knelt in the middle of the palace square. As the mindless killing stopped, she felt her head clear. The voices that the mantra had filled her mind with faded, leaving her free to focus on the sounds of the falling rain, and Vivi's voice. The nightmare is over. But if she had thought she could take a break from mantra and its tiresome effects, she soon realized that it was not to be. That strange mantra thing was happening again. As Vivi spoke, even though she was so far away, Kuina felt as though she could hear another voice coming from the other girl's heart. A voice that spoke of years of uncertainty, years of pain and suffering, only to be vindicated in this one moment in which the people finally stopped fighting, and finally started listening. For even as she felt all this, she knew, with an uncanny certainty, that somehow, Luffy had won and Crocodile had been defeated, and all their struggles, all their sacrifices had not been in vain. Pell. If you could only have seen this. As if in response, she felt the gentlest of caresses upon her cheek. Startled, she raised her hand to her face, and her fingers closed around something light and soft, a single large feather that had by coincidence or fate, fallen all the way from the sky to land on her face. Do not grieve over much. It is never for nothing. She knew that the falling rain would have disguised her tears. But somehow, she still couldn't bring herself to cry. In another part of the great city, 2 figures were making their way slowly down the deserted streets. One was significantly taller than the other, and was using her shoulder as a support. Briggs, just hang in there, we'll get you to a doctor. T, almost there, just keep talking to me, and keep walking. T. Tashigi, don't you dare die on me. Tashigi. You're overreacting, and annoying. I'm overreacting? I'm overreacting? You're the one underreacting? You're all shriveled up and half dead. How's that supposed to be me overreacting? It's raining. I'll unshrivel eventually. You lost your entire arm. Oh, it'll grow back in 6 months. What? It's called limb autonomy. Stick insects have it. Sacrifice a limb to escape, it grows back later. You've got to be kidding me. Not much of an entomologist, are you? Briggs muttered unflatteringly. Normal people can't grow their limbs back, Tashigi retorted. Yes, but I just told you mine do. And it's not as great as it sounds. As in I'll need months, no, years, to retrain the muscles on that arm before I get any decent level of motor control. Not to mention the molting. Wait a minute, did you just call me annoying? Slow on the uptake as usual. Ow, oi, what was that for? You being you. I can't believe you actually gut punched me back there. I don't believe in gender discrimination. Well, on important things anyway. Do you know how stupid you were acting back there? I'd have hit you even if you weren't female. Well, that's flattering. Toshigi briefly considered slapping Briggs again, but despite his insistences he really was too injured for her to be rough with him. Hey old man. It's you. Both Marines paused and realized that they were no longer the only ones on that stretch of the street. Before them stood a man with strange curling hair. He was carrying a little boy who was covered in bruises and bloodstains. Old man? Briggs sounded rather insulted. You're that monster who saved me, said the boy gratefully, with tears streaking down his cheeks. I thought those two assassins were going to kill me, but you drew them away. Oh that. Whatever, kid. Don't mention it. Now go and tell those idiots what you saw and stop them fighting. Briggs was almost brusque in his discomfort of being showered with gratitude. We will. Thank you for your assistance, said the large man with the strange curling hair. The two moved on towards the palace square. Who was that? Toshigi wondered after the two moved out of earshot. You were aware that was Igaram, captain of the Royal Alabastan Guard, right? Probably the only one able to talk sense into the royal army. No? Cripes, do you people under Smoker even bother reading up on the political situation of a country before you get involved in its civil war? I mean, seriously? Briggs? What? You're injured, so save your breath and stop talking. That's an order. Did you just tell me to? Shut up. Briggs glared at Toshigi as in the distance. A trio of Marines who had spotted them came running in their direction. One of them had a Marine-issued medikit with them. Yes, Toshigi told him flatly. Oh, fine. And that was the point when Briggs' grip on her suddenly slackened, and he pitched forward to fall face first into the muddy, soggy ground. Whatever was left of his adrenaline had finally run out, apparently. I told you UW, Toshigi muttered to her now senseless fellow officer as the men came rushing up to help. Who would have thought that out of nowhere, so many Marine ships would suddenly appear and corner them like this? The captain of the weather control ship Rainfall had just about resigned himself to having failed his mission. At the present, being tied up and forced to watch those damned Marines tromping all over his ship, he couldn't decide whom he would have rather been beaten by. The white-haired muscle-bound monster with the jute, or the woman with the unbelievably bright pink hair. It was a tough call. Overall though, the woman Marine was easier on the eyes. There was no getting away from one thing though. Crocodile was not going to be happy when he found out what had happened. As I was saying, Toshigi, the white, smoky Marine was saying to the Den Den Mushi of the captured vessel. We captured the rain-making ship Baroque Works was using. There's quite a haul of dance powder on it too. Enough to convict the one behind it all, even if it is a Shichibukai like Crocodile. Whoever it was on the other side of the Den Den Mushi seemed to react rather seriously to this news. Understood, Captain Smoker. Crocodile will be brought to justice for his crimes. The captain snorted. As if they could. The rain fell, drenching all and sundry. It also completely drenched the battered figure who had crash-landed on his back in the middle of the muddy street. Toshigi held the Den Den Mushi in her hand, listening to Smoker-san's update as she gazed down at Crocodile's beaten form. One might have said how the mighty had fallen. The Shichibukai had been wrong. Smoker hadn't run away. He'd put aside his independent pride and gone for reinforcements. She knew that asking for help was something that did not come easily to her proud captain. But she also knew that for the sake of his subordinates, he would consider it worth every bit of the humiliation. Speaking of which, how's Officer Briggs? Toshigi asked the field medic who had come up behind her, presumably to give a report. He's still alive, just pretty messed up, ma'am. We'll have to get him some proper medical help soon, but what happened to him? Tangled with this guy. Toshigi pointed at the trampled figure lying in the dirt. Is that the warlord Crocodile? The medic said in awe as he recognized the man. Yes. Wait. Officer Briggs fought a Shichibukai? And survived? You're not the only one surprised, trust me, Toshigi said wryly. Did you know that Briggs was a devil fruit user? No, he is. You don't say, ma'am. Whoa. We'll be treating ourselves for shock next. That's what. Did he do this to Crocodile? I bet he wishes he did, but no, then who beat Crocodile? The pirate Straw Hat Luffy. It wasn't us, was all Toshigi could say at last. For all the might of the Marines, it had been a silly rookie pirate from the East Blue who had beaten that warlord. It was wrong on so many levels. But there was at least one thing she, as a representative of the Marines could do. "Crocodile," she began as her men watched in awe, "you have been found in abuse of the powers vested to you as a Shichibukai. I hereby place you under arrest." The war was over. It was raining, and the coolness was a welcome change. No more running around looking for bombs and fighting people. Finally, the exhausted Straw Hats could rest. Roronoa Zoro slumped down against the wall right after Vivi had left. Luffy had beaten Crocodile, and he himself had accomplished more than he ever dreamed possible in a day. Wearily, he leaned against the cool sandstone and enjoyed the luxury of doing nothing. He didn't realize he had dozed off until his senses told him he was no longer being rained on. Blearily opening his eyes, Zoro looked up. Standing before him, with her parasol opened and shielding him from the rain, was Kuina. Kuina. She looked tired and worn, and there was a sad look to her that he had never seen before. A spare sword clutched in her hand made it obvious why. He recognized it as the Birdman's weapon. It seemed that he wouldn't have to explain to her what had happened to the bomb. "You okay?" She nodded. "It's over." There was a pause as both struggled for the right words to say. Their alliance had been rekindled under the threat of the bomb, but now that the shadow had withdrawn, they were back where they had left off. Kuina beat him to it first. He could tell, from the tone of her voice, she was trying to sound cheery in a way she did not feel. "Well, now that this is all over, I guess we can get back to our original business of my reclaiming my sword. But this won't do, Zoro," she clucked disapprovingly, "when I fight you for my Wado, I fully expect you to be in prime condition, not this sorry bloody mess you currently are in." He grinned despite his exhaustion. "Guess you'll have to wait till I recover then." "Looks like it." With a rustle of silk she sat down beside him, shoulder to shoulder. Moments passed with no other sound but the patter of falling rain against the fabric of the shielding parasol. It was a while before Kuina broke the silence again. "Hey Zoro, I had a talk with Luffy." He looked at her in surprise. "And, well, I was wrong about your captain. He's not your ordinary pirate." "No, he is a bit weird," Zoro admitted. "That's an understatement. But I can see why you follow him." For a moment she smiled, before resuming a serious expression. "Hey, I don't know about you, but there are a lot of things I've said and done since Logatown that I wish I hadn't. I should have had more faith in you. That you wouldn't simply lose your sense of honor and turn into a common pirate." She took a deep breath, as if trying to work up her nerve and let go of her pride, before continuing. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, Zoro, I'm sore." Here she broke off, because he had reached for her hand and curled it into a fist. Wordlessly, he brought it to the level of his eyes, then leaned forward and rapped his broad forehead against her knuckles. "There," he said, releasing her hands, "you've hit me on the forehead. We're all right now." He knew she would understand what he meant by it, because she was the only one who ever really understood him. "Baka," she said affectionately, leaning her tired head against his broad shoulder in acceptance. Further words were not needed as they sat in companionable silence. For a little while it was as though they were back at the dojo of her father, sitting beneath the great tree after a sparring session. Just like old times. Roronoa Zoro smiled. Allegiances to pirates and marines notwithstanding, he had his best friend back again. And over Alabasta, the rain fell.